Ladies and gentlemen, Binnall of America!
And now, ladies and gentlemen, your host, Tim Binnall.
No commercials, no subscriptions, no network, no rules. And at the end of the day, my friends, no comparison. Welcome to another edition of BOA The Revival. Really looking forward to tonight's show because we have not delved into the world of UFOs in quite some time. Like many salty old timers like me, I've kind of grown a little cynical to the current UFO scene, and so I don't really have. It's not as interested as much, but I do have a love and appreciation for UFO history. And our mutual friend Jack Brewer was like, UFO history, that's Jeff Knox. You got to get Jeff Knox on the show. So I'm like, oh, for sure. I love Jeff Knox. Jeff Knox is our guest, as you may have surmised by now, folks, and he is all over social media. You can find him on Blue Sky, Twitter, and Facebook. And he's also one of the hosts of UFO Sunset, along with previous BOA guest Rachel Nelson. And he's a UFO historian, archivist. And what I like about him is every day on social media, he posts this day in UFO history. And there's always something interesting that he's got in this archive that he's put together. Always food for thought, always interesting stuff. And classic sort of UFO cases, the kind of stuff we love here on Binnall of America. So let's get back into UFOs. Let's dig into some UFO history here with Jeff Knox. Welcome to the program, Jeff. I'm looking forward to chatting with you, buddy.
Yeah, it's nice to be here. Looking forward to talking to you. I kind of got into the whole UFO history today and UFO thing for the same kind of reasons as you. I was kind of tired of the whole disclosure narrative that was going on. And I felt we needed to get back to the actual cases, the actual history of the topic, because nobody was talking about that stuff. That's kind of why I do what I do.
Yeah, it's remarkable. We'll sort of get into that in a minute, but we always start out with a new guest with the bio, the background. You know, who is Jeff Knox? How'd you get mixed up in all this? How'd you find an interest in the topic? And how'd you decide to kind of do what you do now?
Yeah, so I kind of got into the topic like a lot of people when I was really, really young. I think I was probably, about 8 or something, and kind of grew up in the Bay Area and was watching something on a public access channel. That's pretty much all I watched as a kid. Like my dad was really big in like educational television, and saw a UFO thing, and that kind of like kicked me off and started like looking at like UFO books, like and other paranormal books like in the library, and kind of got really into that. I was kind of on the really early internet back in the day, and bulletin boards kind of before that, and the UFO topic, and kind of stuck with that for many years until about college, and kind of life kind of took over for a little bit. UFOs went on the back burner for a bit while I, kind of had to deal with other things. But then I just kind of got back into the topic about 2007, 2008, just kind of like really throwing myself into it pretty much full time. Probably 40, 50, 60 hours a week. I started doing UFOs again in 2007, 2008. But I was still kind of like, I still had other stuff I was doing, like work and job and trying to make money and whatnot. At about 10 years ago, 2015, I started doing the whole UFO history thing full time. That's all I do all day long, 7 days a week. And I've been doing it for about 10 plus years now as like my sole kind of like career. And so I'm really into the history. I'm really into preserving it. In addition to like the history things I do now, what I used to kind of do is I also scan and help digitize and archive like materials and books and stuff and get that preserved for other researchers. And I pretty much started doing this history thing I do now about 2022 in the summer. Yeah. Kind of got on Twitter. I hadn't really used Twitter much before that. And I see all these people talking about nothing but disclosure, no actual history, no actual talking about the UFOs, no actual talking about the cases. And I've seen other people that do like these day in history things, like today in aviation history,
right.
Today in whatever history. I'm like, hey, maybe I can do that. So I decided to start posting a case, 2 a day of something that happened in history on today's date. And the initial idea was just like one or two cases a day. But like I say, because I do this full time, kind of got a little obsessed. So sometimes I might post a dozen cases. Right now, over the last 2.5 years, I'd say I've posted at least 4,500 plus separate events.
Oh my God.
So there's at least 1 to 2 dozen cases on average per day that I've got for every single day of the year now, kind of out there. So
that's wild. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty much what I do. So,
if you don't mind me asking, how are you able to do this as a full-time job?
Well, back originally, I had actually got into Bitcoin, and so I had some money there for years that I kind of used, that I pretty much did nothing but travel around to conferences and archives and libraries and study like the topic. That money disappeared kind of during COVID. I had some medical procedures and stuff. So now there's no money, but I have nothing else to do. So I'm still doing it.
All right. Yeah. Oh, you're one of those lucky assholes who got in on Bitcoin when it was like $10 a fucking thing, right?
Yeah. At first, and I did the Bitcoin thing for several years, and it allowed me to do my UFO research and kind of do all that stuff. So that was good. I wish I was still in it. I mean, it's really, really doing good these days, but sadly, I'm not in the crypto game anymore.
There you go. Well, I'm sure it's kind of stressful. So
yeah.
All right. So interesting. So now when we were talking about doing the show, you sent me some of these cases that are kind of like, I guess you could say that your favorites, or so to speak, or the ones you've done a particular amount of research on or something like that. One of them go ahead.
Yeah, more so that I don't know, so that I call them my favorites, but just ones that I've spent a lot of time digging into. Yeah.
Okay. Well, before we get into them, why do you think they are the ones that particularly pique your interest? Is there a specific type of UFO case that really, some people might like landing cases, other people might like abductions or humanoid encounters or USOs or something? Is there a specific genre of UFO cases that particularly interest you?
A lot of them are kind of more high strangeness or kind of fun cases that involve landings and humanoids, and I kind of did those because they are fun and people like them. Sometimes what I do is kind of based on suggestions by other people. Other times I'll pick a topic because it relates to something like in the current news cycle. Like I did a thing on this Skystone fragment that was found in Virginia in 1952, mostly because that case was mentioned in the Arrow report. Or a bastardized version of that case was mentioned in the Arrow report, and the debrief ended up writing an article about it. And I was like, wait a second, that's not right. And so I did a bunch of research on it, and I figured, hey, I might as well do a presentation on it anyways. So there's different reasons why I picked to do different things, but I do like the fun, weird ones that are kind of hard to explain. Mostly so I don't have to try and explain them. I try and I'm a skeptical guy, and anyone who follows me on Twitter has probably picked that up by now. But I actually try and stay pretty agnostic about like the topics and the cases I present, and let people kind of decide on their own. That's why when I do my post every day of these various cases, I include all the source material that I draw from and that, is used, so people can go look at that primary material and make up their own decision on what they think about the case. They don't have to take my decision about the case. And so I mostly leave my personal opinions out. But that's not to say if something's a hoax, I will call it a hoax. Right. If it's a scam, I'll straight call it a scam. So
there you go. Yeah. So let's start with the Valensoul case. I looked into these a little bit ahead of time. This is the one with the really funky looking alien with the giant head.
Valensoul Valensoul took place in France.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's kind of a similar shaped kind of craft to the Socorro craft. It's kind of like almost an egg shaped kind of craft that landed in this field of lavender plants in France that they grow in this area. And this guy, Maurice Moss, was a farmer out there, and it's kind of early in the morning, and he's taking a break, smoking a cigarette, and he's hiding out, kind of taking a rest behind this kind of hill, and he hears a kind of a whining sound. And he at first kind of thinks it might be helicopters, because there's military helicopters that sometimes land in the area. And he sometimes goes over and talks to the helicopter people. So he goes up and he looks, and he sees this kind of craft that's like, again, kind of an egg-shaped, landing on like these kind of 3 legs. And then he sees these kind of like beings, these small, he says they kind of look like 8-year-old boys or 8-year-old children, about in size and height, kind of wearing like these kind of coveralls. And they're kind of picking up lavender plants like on the ground and stuff. And one of these, and so he decides to kind of get a closer look, right? So he cuts across this field to go look at these beings and trying to see if he can communicate with them or whatever. And one of these beings is carrying kind of like a stick that kind of he points at him and kind of paralyzes the guy, and the guy can't like move at all. And there's no actual like communication between these beings. The beings, I guess, they take off into the craft and kind of flies away, and he becomes kind of unparalyzed, and supposedly he doesn't return to work. He goes to talk to a friend of his at a cafe, tells him this story, and it's an interesting story. He supposedly kind of had a panic attack and a nervous breakdown after this experience.
I can see that, yeah.
But again, there's not a whole lot we can do with it. Supposedly there's landing traces from where this craft landed. There's these kind of holes in the ground that they found. But aside from like a higher level, like kind of calcium that they found in the dirt, there's nothing really too unusual about the landing sites. It's a single witness case. All we have is this guy that told this story. And admittedly, it was early in the morning. He'd been dozing behind a hill, so he was kind of groggy in a sleepy state. So we don't know what to do with it. There's a variety of explanations for like that case. Again, there was helicopter exercises in the area at that time period that it could have been. But, so that's just one of the cases that kind of looked into. That is a very famous French case. Like, it's probably one of the more well-known kind of cases in France. And this took place back in September 1965, by the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like a seminal French UFO case. It's interesting. I've noticed this talking to other guests in the past, especially Zelia Edgar. We talked about this because she wrote a book sort of on humanoid type encounters. It's just very interesting that and you have a bunch of them in your research. It just seems like there's some kind of, at some point, these humanoid encounters stopped. You don't really hear any from like the turn of the new century. It's really remarkable. Like, you almost never hear about anybody like encountering a UFO and a being like sometime between 2000 and now, as far as I know. I mean, you have a deep archive, maybe of more, but like certainly not anything like that's like a headliner, a Symington's pancake type story where it's like, okay, this is a seminal case of someone encountering a being. It's like those are really from a different era or something.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly had kind of like there's like the various flap periods in the past, right? So like in like 1954, there was like these hairy dwarf flaps, right? Like in South America, where people were seeing all these humanoids that look like hairy dwarfs. Then you also got some of these hairy dwarfs and these kind of little people, the same kind of time period in like France and Spain and Italy, where they had all these humanoid encounters. Of course, there's the bit like 1973 humanoid flap, where there is, Pascagoula and the Higdon one, like with the elk, and like that time period had all these kind of like humanoids. But yeah, and 2000 plus, I mean, there's still like spurious encounters here and there. I don't know. It's just that if people aren't having them, or if they get filtered out and they just don't get the publicity anymore. I mean, you can kind of make that argument about abduction cases as well. Like, people still claim to get abducted, but there really aren't like the big cases that get like the media attention like anymore. And that's really true for UFO cases in general. It's really rare for any individual UFO case to get the kind of like media attention that they used to get in the past, right? So like Balancel, for example, this is 1965. And not only was that case like immediately in the papers, like in France, like within a day or two, it was in a local paper to me the day after.
Oh, wow.
Here in a small town paper in Washington State. And that does not happen anymore. You don't get like a UFO sighting happening in one place and all of a sudden it's in newspapers like around the world. It just doesn't happen. And maybe that's just because, like I say, the media landscape has changed. And Maybe there's just too much. These days, people report everything to social media, and stuff just never filters up to where it gets investigated. And yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. It's just things have changed so much. It's very weird. Yeah, yeah. You don't see any of these sort of signature cases like, I got mixed up in this 20 years ago. So like 2000. Well, I started kind of picking up the books and everything in 2003. Didn't start doing Binnall America in 2005. But like even in that time, in that period now, that 20-year period, like if you throw out the Tic Tac shit, throw any of this government stuff, I don't count that stuff. I mean like real people with real sightings. Only ones like the O'Hare Airport one and Stephenville. Those are like the only two that...
Like 2005 Southern Illinois Triangle that David Marler and a bunch of people investigate. That one got a lot. There's TV shows about it and stuff. But there's not a whole lot like past 2005 that kind of... besides the famous military encounters, like you point out, Tic Tac, Go Fast, that really have gotten a lot of attention.
Now, do you have a favorite case with all these cases you've looked at? Do you have one in particular that's like, that's your baby?
Not really. I mean, and this is something like people always ask me, like they want like a top 10 list or like what's the best cases, man? I'm just like, man, don't ask me that. Like, I don't have like a top 10 list. I don't even know how I'd put in a top 10 list. Like, what does that even mean, really? But there's cases that, I mean, I think they are better documented and stuff, but I wouldn't call them like my favorite cases. Like, there's like some really well documented cases, like the October 1968 Minot Air Force Base case. That case is lots of documentation, but even still, like if your definition is it like my favorite case because I think it might actually be aliens, there's like no cases like that, to be honest. So yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a favorite.
Do you say that because you don't think there are aliens behind the phenomenon?
Yeah. So. I'm not convinced they are. Like I say, I try to be agnostic about like what's ultimately behind any UFO sighting, and obviously every sighting has to be looked at on its own merits because the vast majority of UFO sightings are going to have mundane explanations. But I'm open to the possibility that some UFO sightings could be extraterrestrial visitors, but I've seen nothing that kind of meets my standards of evidence to like make me believe that's the case. I mean, I will say that's what I want to believe. That's what, like many people that got into this topic, particularly like as a young kid like me, like I wanted that stuff to be true. I listened to Bob Lazar on Coast to Coast in the early 90s. Like, I was like, man, I hope this is real. I hope this is great. But I want that to be true, but I have not seen evidence, so I don't think it is. And actually, the more I've been in this topic as years go on, it's actually the more skeptical I get. Like, because the more I dig into these cases, and cases that used to be kind of considered top cases, best of cases, and you see them kind of like fall apart as having mundane explanations. Like an example is like the Charles Whitted case, right? That's a classic case from, early ufology, like 1948, where the pilot sees the kind of cigar-shaped kind of craft with kind of windows along the edge. And it wasn't until later on, 1968, I believe, when the Zond 4 rocket reentry happened, and they interviewed a lot of people and had them draw sketches of what like a fireball reentry looks like from space. And so many of them drew these like cigar shapes with the windows and like that we now know that is pretty much a certainty the Charles Whitted case was just like a fireball that the pilot saw.
Yeah.
Another big case was like the giant Yukon UFO up in Canada in 1993 or 7. It's in the 90s anyways. That's another case that was on many top 10 lists. In fact, there's a documentary, like I believe Paul Kimball made it, like top 10 UFO cases or something. Yeah. And that case almost certainly is a satellite reentry now because we have actually like the records. And to be honest, at the time period, they didn't have the proper data to evaluate the case and figure a lot of this stuff out. It's only like years later that when new information comes to light that we're able to figure out some of this stuff. But when it happens and you see these formal cases that used to be considered like cream of the crop, like the best evidence, just fall apart like as having a mundane explanation, you start to wonder, well, maybe some of these other cases that are supposedly really, really good aren't as great as they really are. And when you've been in the topic as long as I have and really dug into as many of them, you start to become more and more skeptical of like the aliens visiting us answer when there's other explanations that make more sense.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm in the same boat as you. And forgive me who it was on the show I talked to sometime in the last few months, but we kind of both were like, I don't think it's aliens anymore. Like I've kind of long since kind of been like, this doesn't really add up. And if you've been in it a long time, it's you do kind of get more and more skeptical of the original idea that hooked a lot of us, which is like, oh, aliens are coming here. It's like, well, I don't know. I don't necessarily believe it's like aliens like from Mars or whatever. It just doesn't really add up. Like the whole part of, to me, Ren Collier in a long car ride sort of brought this up, and it never dawned on me. It's like the whole difference in gravity and like air, atmosphere, and just germs and shit. And it's like, okay, so some of these stories where like the Valençol case, where like there's these aliens ostensibly, right, whatever, otherworldly beings running around. It's like, okay, well, how are they adapting to the gravity and the oxygen and the and the germs that are out there? Like, it doesn't make any sense unless like they're from here, or it's some kind of interdimensional thing, or it's a mental thing with this guy who saw them. But it's like people like us from another world coming here in a ship and then just getting out, walking around. It's like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and that's something that like Valet and other people have spoken about, is how like, particularly with all like these kind of high strangeness cases, is like some of the things that if these are aliens, like you say, it makes no sense what they're doing either, right? Like, for example, abduction cases. To me, it's absurd that an alien would need to come here, physically abduct someone, and perform medical procedures that, even to our current standards of medical technology, is crude and primitive on these people. Just makes like no sense to me, like at all. Like,
right.
Why does, in the Valençol case, like, why do they need lavender plants? Like, are they making some perfume? Do they like the pretty flowers? Like, I mean, it seems a little weird. There's a guy, a Canadian ufologist named John Musgrave, and he kind of categorized different kind of like cases like that. And he described the case like Valençol as a tourist or like a pit stop case, where these beings seem to kind of come and like they're just on vacation almost, right? Like they stop by, they pick up some rocks or some flowers or whatever, dink around a bit and get in and take off and like leave again. And Valençol is kind of like one of those cases. A couple of other cases, like the Rosedale one in Drumheller, that's another tourist pit stop case. Yeah, it's but they do so many things that just don't make any sense for an alien that supposedly came great distances here just to what? Like mess around with cows or abduct people. And it's just or to go hang out with the guy and offer him some pancakes and ask for a jug of milk. Like what? What?
Well, the Symington case, it's funny because the Symington case has become like this, I don't want to call it UFO hipster, but it's close to it. It's like, it's got this little bit of hipster cred, the Symington case. Like everybody, it's kind of everyone's favorite weird case. I guess, what do you make of that for the people who don't know? It's just like, as you alluded to, like the aliens came down, they asked this guy for some milk, they gave him a couple fucking pancakes that I guess he ate. He had tasted one of them and said it tasted like shit. So what's your take on the Symington pancake story? Because that is one of the more interesting cases, in that there was some kind of like evidence, some kind of like after the case that he had something in his hand that like from the event. I wish that we still had that to look at and figure out more about it, but we don't. But I mean, what's your take on that whole case?
We do.
Who has the Symington?
There's actually there's multiple samples. So when I was working on my lecture on this case, I spoke to Barry Greenwood, who's a legendary ufologist, and he actually used to have one of the samples. He gave it to David Marler. It's now in New Mexico at the
I didn't know that.
Historical UFO Record Center. And another piece is actually still at the Air Force Museum in Wright-Patterson in a display case. And I actually showed some photos of the existing samples that I got in my.
Oh wow! Okay, I thought those were lost to history. All right, I didn't know that.
No, so yeah, they still exist, and there's other people that were given samples too, but they kind of like ate them, and they were tested by a few various labs and whatnot. And the interesting thing is when we supposedly have physical evidence for a case like the pancake case, right? So you might think, well, this adds something to it. Like it's not just a story. We have something physical. We have pancakes that we can test. Unfortunately, whenever we seem to have physical evidence, whether it's landing marks in the Valenzuela case or these pancakes, the actual lab analysis always turns out to be relatively mundane, so that these pancakes were basically like buckwheat pancakes with normal terrestrial ingredients, like nothing fancy in it. One of the kind of myths about the pancake case that everybody kind of gets wrong is that they say that it did not have any salt in the pancake. Yeah. And so if something kind of like about fairy lore, supposedly like there's not salt like in the food, but that's actually not true. Like I found like some of the original lab reports, and there was salt in the pancake. Like they tested and there was salt, and so there's nothing really unusual about the pancake evidence. Like you said, it was a gross pancake. He tasted it, said it kind of was like cardboard. Another guy tasted it, said it was just kind of like the most dull, bland, kind of like pancake that like you could have. As far as like what happened to him, it's really weird. I'll point out this case happened kind of around lunchtime, and he was kind of just in his kitchen, hanging out, eating breakfast at the time. So did he cook the pancakes himself and kind of fall asleep and forget about them? I don't know. But it was kind of breakfast time, and he kind of heard like a whining sound outside of his window that he said kind of reminded him of planes that have flown over the area before. And so he goes out to his window and he looks and he sees this kind of, again, it's kind of like two bowls or plates kind of together, kind of a classic kind of saucer shaped kind of land in his yard kind of out there. And he goes out there and talks to this guy that kind of looks Italian, right? And hands him a jug of, an empty jug, and asks him to go fill up water in it. So he supposedly goes back inside to his basement, fills up the jug with water, goes back outside, gives the guy the jug of water back. Inside the craft, he sees a couple other guys in there. And one of them's on this grill, supposedly cooking up pancakes, on the grill inside of this like spaceship. And Joe Symington kind of gestures to him because he's in both this case and Valenzuela, there's no actual verbal communication. None of these beings actually talk to these people. It's just kind of like gesture-based movements. And so Symington gestures to the guy kind of like, what's going on? Like, you're eating. Like, he makes a hand gesture kind of like, are you eating? Trying to ask a question. But apparently they take that as like, oh, you want some pancakes? Okay, cool. So we'll give you some pancakes. And so the guy scoops off 4 of these pancakes and hands them over to him. And like I say, he takes a bite. It doesn't taste very good. And he has the other samples of the pancakes. He ends up giving them to a few people. Ultimately, I believe 1.5 of the pancakes got destroyed in a fire when his house burnt down. And so they lost that sample, but he gave samples to 2 separate people from the Air Force. And so those got tested by different people. And like I say, somehow samples ended up with Barry Greenwood. And so now we still have some of those samples. Yeah. It's a weird case because I kind of, for cases like that and Valenzuela, I kind of almost come down to this like waking dream kind of theory. Like you say, it's almost like maybe a lucid dream. Like he fell asleep having breakfast maybe, and had took those pancakes up himself and kind of woke up and, confabulated this story. It's hard to say. There's one theory, something that in my research I kind of dug up that wasn't really well known. And it was mentioned in the literature, and this is one of the things when I research these cases that I regularly find stuff that was actually in the files, but for some reason nobody's ever mentioned. Like they either just didn't read it, they didn't notice it. Yeah. There's actually a story from the time period of a guy that claims the whole Joe Pancake story was a hoax. that he hypnotized Joe Symington.
What?
Yes. And so he hypnotized Joe Symington. And the theory is that so this case happened in Eagle River, which is in the Land of Lakes region of Wisconsin.
Okay.
So it's basically it's like a touristy kind of area. People vacation and do stuff like that. And this guy was like into real estate, and the idea was that they would get a bunch of it. His claim was he would get a bunch of attention for Eagle River, to get like tourism and population and real estate deals and whatnot. And so he claims he hypnotized Joe Symington, and he made him repeat, and he implanted this story, about the pancakes and the saucers, and made him repeat it something like 20 times. So he would have the story locked into his memory, and it'd be the same story he'd tell every single time. And supposedly this is what happened. This guy claimed this happened. So I don't know that that's actually true, because it turns out that this guy had no experience with hypnosis. So I'm not sure how he would have hypnotized Joe Symington. And it's really interesting how sometimes you get people coming up with these explanations like, oh, it's a hoax, I hypnotized the guy. This actually comes up also in the Emerson encounter that I did a story on, where, again, a guy later claims, oh, it's fake, I actually hypnotized the guy. But, you can never prove it. You don't know that they actually did it. You look into the guy, it turns out he doesn't have any experience in hypnosis. Turns out there is only one person in Joe Symington's life that did have experience with hypnosis. And that was the local judge, Frank Carter. Frank Carter was actually an ICAP member already at the time, and had given UFO lectures that Joe Symington had actually attended, beforehand. So Joe Symington actually called this judge about the case the week to try and the next day to try and tell him the story. And this judge was actually contacted NICAP after all this happened. And NICAP never took the story serious. NICAP was very anti-contactee at the time. Yeah. And so they're like, we don't want to get involved in this crazy stuff. We don't even want to analyze these pancakes. That's going to be a waste of money. What are we supposed to do with a bunch of pancakes anyways, right? But this judge guy, anyways, was a magician. He was a member of the International Brotherhood of Magicians. He was a ventriloquist. He practiced hypnosis, and was a big UFO buff. So it's really hard to say, because a lot of these stories, you can say, well, how did they come up with it if they weren't into UFOs beforehand? But then you find out they weren't exactly as UFO naive as perhaps we were led to believe.
Right.
The same thing I think is true with Betty Hill. I don't believe she was as naive as she was led to believe. And so I don't know what to do with the pancake case. It's a really fun story. Like I say, I like it. A lot of people like it. It's bizarre. It's weird. I don't buy the hypnosis claim. I don't really think you need it. But again, it doesn't also make a whole lot of sense that it was aliens that looked like small Italians in uniforms cooking pancakes, asking for jugs of water.
Yeah. It's very weird. It's a weird case. I think that's why people love it, because it's so fucking strange. The hypnosis angle is really weird. I guess in 2025, it's so hard to fathom someone being I hypnotized him and did, because I don't know if anyone nowadays, people have a really weird view of hypnotism where it's they think it's kind of like a parlor trick or something. Back then, I think people had a little more belief in sort of the ability to mesmerize. And maybe in turn that had a kind of a placebo effect where people could be more mesmerized. So it's very interesting. As you kind of noted, that has kind of been lost to history, this claim. Who is this? Was this random fucking dude who had real estate in the area who was he just came forward later on and was no, I hypnotized him.
Yeah, Harry Pride, this guy's a real estate broker, and supposedly him and a bunch of friends decided to create it up for some publicity for tourism. But like I say, no evidence for it, and there's some potential corroboration for Joe Symington's story. There were some neighbors that did claim to see something about the same time period as they were kind of driving on Highway 70, kind of nearby. But, it's hard when you have people that come in and say, oh, yeah, I saw something. You don't know necessarily if it's because they didn't report it before the event. When they go looking, it's are they just coming up with something after the fact? do you know that it's really at the exact same time? Because you don't really know exactly when, say, Joe Simonton, this was happening. Is it the exact same time they're driving on the road? You know, it's really hard to say. But it's a fun case, and it was investigated by Hynek. Hynek, went out there himself with two of his assistants to investigate the case. And he talked to Joe, and he talked to Frank Carter and various other people. I guess Hynek ultimately wasn't all that impressed with it. Although there's some evidence in his later book, The Edge of Reality, that he did with Valet, that he was kind of starting to open up more to these kind of encounters. You got to remember, in the mid-'60s, like, Hynek wasn't quite as out there as he would be later on when he kind of left Blue Book and started Kufos and all that stuff. And so I think he kind of opened up to it more later on, but at the time he wasn't very impressed with the case. And it's just one of these kind of strangeness ones that what do we do with? Like, it's there. I at this point, and it's so far in the past, I don't know that there's much more we can learn about it. It'll just forever be a cool kind of like folkloric legend of ufology.
Well, it's 2 points I was going to make. First one is a reference to something you said earlier, was how these classic cases sometimes fall apart as we learn more about them. I've said repeatedly on the show in recent years, and maybe I was giving you grief for you got to get all this shit onto a web page or something, because I can't. It's hard for me. It was hard for me to dig into your archive of this day in UFO history. But it'd be interesting to take that information and what we know about some of these cases and kind of look at them now with the drone aspect involved. Because, like, I can't remember when drones first came on the scene, but certainly, like, after I had gotten into UFOs. So, like, after post-2003, I forget when drones became, like, kind of part of the zeitgeist, but it was, like, I want to say, let's just give it a random, like, 2010 or whatever, right?
Mainstream, anyway. I mean, drones have existed since the 40s.
Right.
But yeah, mainstream.
You know what I mean? It was like all of a sudden it was just drones were all over the place. It's like Bitcoin or whatever. It became a part of the culture. Drones. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like how, like, all of a sudden Viagra came on the scene. It was like everywhere you looked, there was like Viagra jokes and this, that, and the other thing. It was just everywhere. It was like that's kind of what happened with drones. Like around some year, like since turn of the century, but. It stands to reason then you can look backwards and be like, well, look, if we the public just got, knowledge of these drones and what they can do, then clearly the government's been fucking around with these drones for like 20 years or whatever. Mm-hmm. So it would be instructive to like look at like, okay, let's look at the 80s, 90s cases where, the old sort of thing where it's like no craft can do what I saw this thing do. And it's like, well, let's look at what you saw now with the benefit of knowledge of drones. And it's like, oh, you saw a fucking drone, dude. Oh, it was like, it was zipping around and it was a tiny ball of light that zipped around and fucking took off. And it's like, yeah, that's a fucking drone, man. That's, and nowadays, I think people would see something like often I report on these UFO cases for Coast to Coast, and it's often like, drone is like one of the primary possibilities. If it's not an alien, it could be a drone, that kind of thing. So it's like, I wouldn't be surprised if a significant number of classic cases turned out to be experimental drones that they were fucking around with.
Yeah, and the thing with drones is, particularly these days, is that they can basically mimic the appearance of all the so-called like 5 observables, right? They can do what looks like instantaneous acceleration at weird angles. Like it's insane, like what you can see these things do. So yeah, and now that, there's like more than 1 million civilian like owned just like quadcopters in the US like alone. And that's just civilian. And then we've got military stuff in the sky. Like, the sky is just getting more and more flooded with, actual drones that it's honestly not surprising. The UFO community makes a lot of noise about like a drone seen around like a military facility or something. I mean, but to me, that's actually not all that surprising considering how many drones are out there that people are potentially either seeing just civilian drones or even, like you say, just military drones that are flying like in the area.
Right.
So yeah, drones is kind of taken over everything. It's kind of a joke almost on UFO Twitter, like UAP now just means drones, like UAP equals drone.
Yeah.
So many sightings have been kind of taken over by drones, but yeah, and in the past, not even just drones, a lot of people in the UFO community kind of mocked the idea. I don't know if you remember, the CIA kind of came out with a paper and at one point tried to kind of claim that a bunch of Blue Book sightings were caused by the U-2 spy plane. And that you could just write it off as like the U-2. That was obviously kind of overblown. Like the U-2 was not accounting for all of those kind of sightings at the levels they were accounting for. But it is actually true that some sightings were, without a doubt, actual U-2s. And I've actually posted like 1 or 2 cases that it's pretty certain it was a U-2 that person had seen and that they had tracked down. So there is things in the sky that people are misidentifying. I think misidentifications comes down to like kind of a lot of it, particularly when we're just talking about sightings, like lights in the sky. It's a little harder to use that as an explanation when somebody claims they saw like a humanoid right in front of them, 10 feet away.
For sure. Yeah. And it's really, it's kind of a wake up call in a way too. I'm sure you kind of see this in the news a lot yourself. The fucking Starlink satellites, like people, there are a lot of people, we know about these because we're UFO heads, but it's like people would be shocked at how many folks out there like have no idea about the Starlink. And then they see it and they're like, holy shit, I saw a string of UFOs. And all the time I'm getting like local news outlets that are like, what were those lights in the sky on Thursday night? Our station was flooded with people who saw a string of strange lights in the sky. And they're like, it was Starlink. And it's like, it happens all the time. People, I guess the Arrow report also mentioned that pilots are seeing the Starlink, and they're confused sometimes by what they're seeing. And they think it's like something otherworldly. So that's another aspect of it.
They came out with Arrow came out with a whole special report just on Starlink, just because it's like such a thing. And as you point out, it seems kind of weird that pilots, like keep misidentifying this. But one of the things with Starlink that people like don't understand is a lot of people are familiar with the Starlink train where they see these lines of Starlinks in the sky. And those actually only pertain to when they were just launched. So they're still separating out into orbit. And so that's why you see them in the lines in the sky like that. A lot of what the pilots are seeing, you don't see the line. You just see like one of the satellites as it kind of flares and kind of disappears over the horizon. And so they're seeing like these lights that they think are zooming off over the horizon. And it's actually just one of the Starlinks in orbit as it moves off and disappears like over the horizon. But they're like, oh, I've seen Starlink. It doesn't look like the normal Starlink. Well, yeah, it doesn't look like the normal Starlink because they're no longer close together like that. They've reached their stable orbit points and they're farther apart. But the thing is, there's so many Starlink satellites up there. If you look at an animation of all the Starlinks, they're constantly, it's like a grid that's constantly crisscrossing each other opposite directions. And so some of these weird movements that some of these pilots report, like one light went this way and another went this way. It's like, well, yeah, because the satellites are moving in opposite directions, crisscrossing each other all the time. And it can look weird, but it accounts for a lot of UFO sightings and a lot of pilot sightings these days. I don't know if you recall, there was kind of a big snafu with the SCU, the Society for, scientific, whatever it's called, had a big presentation a couple years ago where supposedly a pilot saw a mothership, I believe, flying to Hawaii or something. They said it was like a mile-long mothership, and it was like their big key point they were selling. And it got debunked in like 4 minutes as a Starlink sighting, like once they posted like the thing online. It's still happening. It's kind of crazy. It still happens, but people really just don't know what's in the sky. They really don't. They have no clue what's in the sky.
Yeah, for sure. It's like I said, it's surprising how many people, a lot of people just don't even know about the Starlink period. Like I said, so they'll see the train, regular people, and they'll be like, that's what else could this be? It's like it's a trail of UFOs. It's like, no, dude, you haven't heard? There's a satellite system up there. It's fucking crazy.
Well, people still misreport rocket launches like as UFOs, right? Like, because they'll do the cool little like curly Q spiral patterns sometimes, and like the famous Norway spiral event that was just every time a SpaceX launches, there's UFO sightings reported in mass, like, because people are like, what's that in the sky? What's those lights? Like you say, and the newspapers will cover them, the media will cover them. And then sometimes there'll be a follow-up story. It was just a SpaceX launch, that launch. It's like, but you didn't say that until after you got your views and your clicks and, hyping up this story of what was those strange lights.
Right.
And
that's how it works.
It certainly doesn't help, though, for getting this topic taken seriously. People like to talk about the stigma all the time. Oh, the stigma, the negative stigma of the UFO is like, well, it's kind of deserved in many cases because we keep wasting time with silly nonsense, Yeah,
that's for sure. Well, it's interesting too. I wonder, it's like a chicken and an egg kind of thing where it's like, we were talking earlier about how there's not that many sort of like signature cases of the last like 25 years or so. And I think the difference in a way too was like, they were reported differently back then. Like they would kind of, like we were saying, they would get spread around a little more organically in a sense than it is now. And back in the day, like let's say take Pascagoula, right? Pascagoula happens, and like there's people from these UFO groups that fucking like go, and they're like on the next train to Pascagoula to get to talk to these people and everything. Like you don't really see that anymore. In 2025, where someone will, first of all, you don't really see someone reporting some like particularly fantastical thing where like a UFO landed and a guy got out or whatever. But even if they did, like I don't think there's anyone that's like, it's their gig where they're like, all right, I'm going out to Poughkeepsie to talk to this guy that says he encountered a being or whatever. Like there's no one really who's like doing this the way they did back in the day.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, so many of these cases that I've dug into a lot and that I've done these presentations on, like I say, there was somebody on the ground investigating it almost immediately.
Right.
Like NICAP sent somebody, because like they'd have local people too, like all their local like subcommittees and stuff. And so they'd usually have someone somewhere nearby, and they could have somebody there, like the next day and boots on the ground investigating. You don't see that much anymore. I mean, as far as like the only really group that does any sort of sightings investigations is MUFON. And to be honest, I'm not sure how much real field investigations they get around to these days. I think a lot of sightings are, like I say, just normal kind of lights in the sky kind of things that you don't even have to go out to the field necessarily to like investigate. But there just isn't, back then we had NICAP, we had APRO, we had dozens of little small flying saucer groups and organizations like everywhere. And like you say, they would be investigated. Then somebody would write a report. It'd get put out in newsletters. It'd be put out, copy and pasted in every book. It'd be in the newspapers everywhere. And so the story would get around. You just don't have that these days. Like most people, I don't even think report stuff to UFO organizations like MUFON anymore. They just dump it on social media. They're like, hey, look what I saw.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, because back in the day, who would you tell about this thing you saw? Except like you would call the local newspaper or whatever and be like, I saw this crazy thing. Now, like you're saying, yeah, people can just go on social media and be like, hey, look at this thing I saw. They skip the newspaper, and then it's like it goes out to a whole different audience in a way.
And people used to even just call the cops, right? Like,
right.
Joe Simonton told his story to like the local sheriffs. Another case, the Southall, Virginia case I had looked into, again, the local sheriff came with another officer, like within half an hour to like investigate the case. So a lot of the time back then, particularly in these older cases, people were still reporting stuff to the local police. The police still, to an extent, sometimes took them seriously and went out and investigated. And if cops came out, you can almost guarantee there'd be newspaper coverage, eventually of the story, and it gets spread around. And that just, that just doesn't happen anymore. Honestly, I can't imagine the very idea of calling a cop to report a UFO sighting. To me, is just insanity. Like,
yeah.
It seems crazy to me people did it back then, but they did. But yeah, now we don't, unless the case like gets picked up by MUFON, maybe it's one of like their best cases. It's really like rare for like a more recent years case to kind of like reach the UFO zeitgeist where people know and hear about it.
Yeah.
The only kind of case I can think of that MUFON's done in the last 10 years that people have heard about is that Bell Bar case in, I think, Ontario, Canada. And that's just because it was picked up in recent years on UFO Twitter and people did podcasts about it and whatnot. But yeah, there's very few cases that actually people learn about these days.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I don't really I kind of focus on older cases in general. I try and avoid a lot of the new stuff because I'm trying to educate people more about the history of this topic. It's also one of the reasons why I've kind of, there's a lot of, for all the posts I have, I've actually avoided doing posts on a lot of famous cases. So I don't actually have threads on like Travis Walton. I don't have one on Betty and Barney Hill. I don't have one on Exeter. I have some minor threads on Exeter. That's not really like my normal thing. Like on Betty and Barney Hill, I have peripheral things that happened afterwards. Like just this week was the anniversary when they first told their story to their Unitarian church. And I had a post on that. But one of the reasons why I've kind of avoided some of these famous cases is because they're famous. People already know about them. And there's already 5 billion documentaries and books about them, and like people have learned about them. And I'm trying to teach people about stuff that perhaps they haven't heard about before. I do a lot of famous cases still, but there's still some of those really famous ones I haven't done like my full treatment on, just because they're already kind of well known.
Yeah, they're well worn,
Yeah, well worn, well known.
And just to make a good joke here, I think I think it's safe to say the most famous MUFON case of the last 10 years would be the Jan Harzen case. And folks can Google that if you want to know more about that very intriguing case that so well connected to MUFON.
Yes, I knew Jan.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
Well, it's met him many times and everything, and try to work with him to get MUFON to release a bunch of their archives. I've always felt they should share their symposium proceedings. I felt that they should share their old journal archives just to the public.
That stuff's not available.
No,
be a member.
You can pay them now for what they call a Project Aquarius membership to get it like $50 a year or something. But honestly, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to download a 50-year-old symposium proceeding for free in PDF. That's my view. I'm in agreement with you there. I tried to work with MUFON a few times, but it just nothing worked out. And then, like you say, that stuff happened, and I kind of haven't been back to MUFON in years, and let my membership lapse.
Well, I'll share a story. I was at an event a few years back, and the people were getting ready to go to the symposium, and they were local directors or whatever, and they said they were required, as local directors, they were required to attend the symposium on their own fucking dime. Mm-hmm. It's this is all right. I think you're in a cult. I think you might be in a cult because you have to pay. They had to buy a ticket. They had to buy a ticket, even though they were regional director of whatever. It's come on, dude. If you're regional director of the Baltimore area or whatever, you should fucking be able to just come for free. Maybe pay for your hotel and flight, but certainly not be required to come and pay for your hotel and flight and buy a ticket. That's kind of all right. I don't know if I like the cut of their jib here with this, but if that's what you're into.
I actually stood in for a state director at a MUFON symposium back in Lou Elizondo's kind of first public appearance, right, in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, at the MUFON Symposium in 2018. The local Oregon guy, again, didn't want to go, didn't have the money, I don't know what it was, and I was going anyways, and so I actually sat in as the temporary state director in the meetings and everything back there.
Oh, there you go.
They show off the budget and the kind of money they're spending. Then they had Lou Elizondo come out there and say hello to everybody and talk to us on stage, and so I've actually sat through one of those state director meetings at a symposium before. But yeah, you do have, like, there's no discount or anything. You pay for everything.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, it's quite the racket. What are your, I know you don't like the famous cases, but I mean, that's kind of the ones I'm more familiar with. So what's your take on, like, let's say Roswell?
Yeah, so Roswell, I think, to be honest, I think it was just a balloon that they found debris of. And I think there's a paper by a guy named Kent Jeffries that was in a journal. There's that kind of organization that puts out a lot of parapsychology stuff, the SSE, the Society for Scientific Exploration. And in their journal, he put out this paper, kind of anatomy of like a myth. And you kind of, again, I find when you dig into a lot of the primary source material, so much of what's wrong with ufology is what people learn about a case they read in a book or they saw in a documentary.
Right.
And what they've read in that book is not actually what is in the original files. Like, it's been distorted because that book probably copied and pasted it from another book, which copied and pasted it from another book, which misrepresented what was in the original files. And so you really kind of got to go look at, like, the original testimonies and the original files to kind of get down to a case. And he kind of dug into it. And if you really look at what people described at the time period, it's pretty much identical to, like, the balloon and the debris from a balloon. So I think that's what happened in that case. I think as far as people that, like, claim they saw, you have to remember when the Roswell story came out, there was no story about bodies or any of that stuff. It was just the debris. That story did not develop for decades until, it got regenerated when Stanton Friedman started digging into it and kind of dug up these new witnesses and whatnot. At the time period, nobody even reported a spaceship or a craft or a crash. They just simply found debris on the ground that looked like foil and like sticks and stuff. So if you consider that and kind of dismiss these stories that develop decades after the fact, I think you've got a balloon. Some people argue that the balloon flight floor never made it or couldn't have been responsible. So the theory is that there's this Project Mogul, which was this kind of a secret program, right? They launched these balloons and they'd monitor for nuclear detonations, like in Russia and whatnot. And so there is this flight floor that supposedly was supposed to launch that could have been what crashed was the Roswell balloon. Proponents argue that flight never actually took off because the logbook says it was canceled, but actually they did launch it. It just was not a full flight. Like they launched it without, like, the instrument panel, I believe.
Okay, yeah.
If I remember correctly. So there was still a balloon that they launched, because once you fill it up, you can't unfill it up and unuse it. Like, even if the conditions aren't right, you still let it go. Like, yeah. And so there was a launch, and I think that's what it was. Unfortunately, I don't think it was an alien spaceship, and I don't think there's any evidence of that. But Roswell is one of those, it's like the UFO case, right? Like, if somebody doesn't know anything about UFOs, they probably still heard about Roswell.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. You could go, like, anywhere in the world and be like Roswell, and they'll draw you like an alien. Yeah. Like, you go to, like, Africa or France or some country where they don't speak English and be like, or Japan or whatever, and be like, what do you think of when I say Roswell? And they'll, like, draw an alien. It's crazy.
Yeah. I like Roswell. I've been to Roswell many, many times. I've spent a lot of time in there. They've got a great research library there full of archives of ufologists like Lauren Gross. Lauren Gross is a guy that you sort of say he almost kind of did what I did, only he printed these publications kind of like by year, where he would cover, cases kind of like by date, with news clippings and other things. His entire archives are there. There's a lot of great files at the Roswell Museum there, beyond the museum part, which is cool to look at the displays and everything. But for a researcher like me, it's their library. That's like really where you want to go. And so I spent quite a bit of time in there scanning documents and whatnot. I spent a lot of time. I've actually camped out on the debris field maybe a dozen times.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I've been out there a lot. I've even dug up, I even found a piece of metal debris out there, a really old piece of rusted metal debris that I'm pretty sure is like an 80-year-old tin can of some kind. Yeah, it's I've been out there, but I unfortunately I don't think it's aliens, and I don't think there's really. I think Roswell's a waste of time, to be honest, at this point.
At this point, yeah, absolutely, yeah. It's been done to death. I just figured I'd ask you. Now, as a historian archivist, now you said like you visit the archives. Let's I don't know if you've been to the Marler one yet or whatever, but let's say you go to a UFO archive. What's your game plan? What do you do? What are you looking for?
Well, first of all, I'm well prepared with my scanning machines. I've got a couple of machines like I used to scan documents with. And sometimes I go with the list of things I'm looking for, because as I'm doing my research, doing like case research throughout the year and whatnot, I'll stumble across some stuff that like I don't have. Like I've got a lot of UFO stuff. Like I spent more money than I will ever admit buying UFO junk over the years. But there's stuff I don't have. So like I'll keep a list of stuff I hope to find somewhere to like scan, right? Or I'll go and my next plan I want to do is there was an organization called the Fund for UFO Research, FUFOR, that was kind of they paid for a lot of the Roswell research actually back in the day, and they would put out a bunch of publications that they helped study, that they helped fund and whatnot. And most of those, you can't really buy them and you can't find them anywhere. I'd like to go scan them all so I can get them online. Yeah. So I usually look for material that's hard to find or rare that hasn't been scanned before, because I don't want to duplicate efforts. But every once in a while, I'll end up scanning something that somebody else has already scanned. Like one time when I went to the Roswell archives, I scanned a document that I was looking for on forest lookout towers. There's a whole catalog. There's a guy named James Dorter that was actually down here in Oregon who worked for the Forestry Service, and he collected reports of people that worked in lookout towers out in the forest, because they would see lights and stuff sometimes when they were like watching for fires and stuff. And so he's got the whole catalog of sightings from forest lookout towers. I ended up scanning that only to find out that it had already been scanned. That Isaac Coy guy is always scanning documents and beating people to it and putting them on the internet. So I try and make sure something's not already scanned. But sometimes I have a list. Sometimes I just go and I browse. And there's just so much good stuff that I'll scan until I run out of time and need to get out of there.
I tell you to get the fuck out. So what? Now, you're not a believer in the aliens. You largely think this is prosaic, so why preserve the history of all this and all the sightings and stuff? What's the motivation, I guess? Because I suppose the other side of the coin is there's probably someone who was maybe was collecting all this stuff and eventually was yeah, it's all bullshit, I'm out, and decided they were just done with UFOs. So what motivates you as someone who's grown increasingly skeptical to keep going and documenting this stuff that is like a history of seemingly misidentifications of Venus and shit?
Well, I mean, you could ask what's the motivation of folklorists who collect folklores and legends and myths and whatnot well. I mean, I personally think it's just for historical purposes valuable cataloging, because even if it's not aliens, it's still a part of our cultural history and identity, and it's played it's had effects on everything from our entertainment industry to all sorts of things. So I think it's worth studying. And personally, I think some of the cases, so you always have a large part that are going to be just basic kind of misidentifications. I think some of the kind of residual might come down to psychological, like various cognitive and psychological errors and factors at play, as well as problems with like your visual perception system. I think that's probably one of the least looked at aspects of like studying UFO sightings, is that people just really don't understand that the tricks like your mind and your eyes and your brain can play on you in the perceptual process. And I think that could explain a lot of other sightings that kind of remain unidentified. So I think it needs to be preserved. So at least in the future, if somebody does want to look at it, it's there so we can study it. Yeah. Whether we'll find anything truly groundbreaking, I don't know about that. Like, I don't think we're going to find like, 0-point energy in, UFO sightings, or like, I'm not one of these people that believe like utopia is going to come from like the UFO disclosure. Once we find out about all the UFOs, we're going to have the free energy and everything. Great. But I think it's at least important culturally to like preserve it. And I've always been kind of like a librarian, like nerd that likes to collect and preserve everything. Even before UFOs, like I was always kind of like a digital hoarder as well, like always preserving, digitizing. I come from the old piracy scene back in the day on the internet, trading music around and whatnot. And even back then, I was always digitizing all my CD collections and everything else that I have. So like, I've always just been really into like archiving, preserving everything for history. I don't really believe in throwing stuff away. That's probably why I have so much stuff.
All right. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I wasn't trying to like belittle what you do or anything. I was just kind of like, you get kind of what I was saying, where it's just like, well, why even bother? But I do think it is important, because this is like, for so long, the study of UFOs was like on the periphery of science and culture, really. As far as like the people doing the legwork and in the trenches and stuff, actually like compiling these cases and the reports and the UFO groups and everything. And that is all sort of like had been until like it recently was, thanks to efforts like you and Dave Marler and other folks out there, Jack Brewer and folks like that, who are Erica Lukes, who are sort of assembling these archives and keeping them around, because otherwise, as these people pass away, that stuff would be lost to history, Like when Stan passed away, they gave all his stuff to this museum up in New Brunswick, and last I heard, they were like still sifting through it all, but it's like all just haphazardly, all like put together, like in his office.
I like to joke I have the same filing system as Stanton Friedman, because you've seen photos of like his office back in the day, and it kind of looks like a mad professor's office or something, just stacks of paper, like 5 feet tall on desk everywhere, like. And that's kind of like the vibe I'm going for around here. But you're absolutely right. I believe they estimated it's like a decade or something for them to even sort through like his files and like to really get through them. And this is why I'm particularly kind of passionate about like digital preservation, like taking those archives and then making sure it's all scanned digitally, because then we can have copies of it sent around to other researchers and kept online. And the fact of the matter is people's collections get destroyed. Floods happen. Fires happen. I know floods happen. I had a flood happen. Took out my desk over there. Fires happen. There's actually been so many researchers, like famous researchers, like their archives were either thrown away when they died because like their family is just like, what do we need this garbage for? Or their files got destroyed, like they were left in like a soggy like shed outdoors, and they got destroyed by moisture. And so thankfully, through like the work of people like David Marler and this new Historical Archive Center, and people like Jen Aldrich and Barry Greenwood and people that have been sending their collections into him, we're starting to like have at least a place where we can preserve this. The next step will be get that digital preservation going on, so it's kind of there for everybody, because not everybody can travel to an archive and look at the files. And frankly, you don't want everyone to travel to an archive and look at the files, because once you start people's grubby hands digging, some of these old papers are literally, they're what's that kind of old copying they used to do with like the blue?
Oh, mimeograph or something?
Yeah, like mimeograph stuff, right? Like some of this stuff's like fragile paperwork and documents. Like that's the kind of thing with archives is a lot of archives actually limit who they let in. The people that are actually qualified with dealing with archival like material and like not messing it up. Like if you were to try to go to the archives down at Rice University, where like, for example, you couldn't even go see Ballet's files are now at Rice University with the Archives of the Unexplained. His files are locked up for so many years, like you can't even look at them if you wanted to. He put like a time lock on them. But places like that, they won't even let you in unless you're actually like qualified, like to, have some experience with them. So yeah, I'm all about the digital.
Sense. You know, I mean, they have a Bob Dylan archive, I don't know, somewhere in the Midwest, and it's like, I would fucking like to just spend a week like rifling through all that shit, and they'd be like, who the fuck are you? No, you can't come in and read Bob Dylan's old papers, man, which is a point that I wanted to make too, because I'm kind of in the process of like consolidating my life in a way as this crazy world gets crazier. It's like, all right, I need to be able to pick up sticks and get the fuck out of town if I need to. So lately I've been kind of like shifting through and sifting through sort of like shit that I've collected over the years. And it did strike me, not like I'm any fucking important person or whatever, like that my archive would be donated to anybody. But the point being is that, again, if you look back like the last like 20 years or so, like back in the day, these guys, these archives we're talking about, like people were like fucking exchanging letters and shit. It was written down. For as much as and I like what you're talking about, digitizing the old stuff, it's almost like we need some manner of like undigitizing the modern stuff. Because it's like no one, all of my correspondences with people like Jim Mars and Stan Friedman and shit, that's like all the emails and stuff that like would be letters back in the day. When I'm gone, that shit's just fucking gone. You know, it'll be wiped out. Like stuff, a lot of that stuff will be just vanished. And that's the case, I think, for like so many other people contemporaneously. I mean, just like how we set up this interview, like on a Twitter DM, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like 20, 30 years from now, if Twitter's even still around, we may not be, and that shit will just be gone. And it'll be like, I don't know how important our Twitter exchange would be, but it's just gone nonetheless. You know what I mean? So it's an interesting sort of shift in how information is preserved and collected, and how we really kind of face a weird conundrum going forward where a lot of this contemporaneous stuff could be lost.
Yeah, I always say I was born too late. Like, I actually wish I was around for like the heyday of all the old UFO publications and newsletters and journals, like where, like you say, they actually put stuff on paper and ink and like mailed it out and sent it out to everyone. Like that stuff is largely gone. Like we don't even have really, like, in the 90s, there was like UFO magazine, but that doesn't exist anymore. There really is no like print UFO magazine in the United States. Like for a brief while, about 10 years ago, there's Open Minds for like 2 years or like a year and a half or something that put out a little magazine. But there really is no like print media. And to be honest, I'm not even sure there's like a market for it. I think that might be why there is no print media, because it's just not financially like feasible. I know there's people that have like looked at like starting one up, but I don't think it work out. There's other countries that still do some print magazines. Like I think Brazil still has a UFO magazine that they print. That's pretty popular. Like Sweden has some various ones, but yeah, this stuff it's not on paper anymore. It's not in physical form, but we do need to preserve digital stuff as well. We spoke on Twitter about an interview you did with Carl Feind. And one of the things is that, so he had a website, this water UFO website, where he had a database with all these UFO sightings that had some relation to water. Well, when he died about 6 years ago, I believe it was, the concern was that the website would be disappeared and we lose that data. And so one of the things I did for something that's called like this is a group of people, the Swords History group. They kind of put together a book called UFOs in Government about 10 years ago, which is an excellent book. One of the things I did with that group was I digitally archived and preserved Carl Feind's website to put into our files, so we have them forever. So there's always a copy of it out there. Now, fortunately, Internet Archive also already did it, so you can still get to it through Internet Archive. But yeah,
who knows? That could go down. Yeah, that was threatened. Yeah, we need like multiple copies at this point, anyway, with a lot of this stuff.
And that's why people like Isaac Coy have been archiving Reddit and Above Top Secret. And he's even archived my Twitter post at one point. He took a bunch of the larger UFO Twitter accounts and archived a bunch of their Twitter posts. So, yeah, we do absolutely need to start saving and archiving this digital communication as well, because otherwise it's going to get lost.
Yeah, yeah. And especially, like I said, I mean, beyond publications and stuff, it's, yeah, like personal correspondences are just going to be gone. And that you don't have, like I said, like back in the day, you had these dudes like sending each other letters and shit and arguing about it, or like, hey, we had thought about this or whatever. Now it's like all that's done through email or private messages and shit, and that never will see the light of day, you know, when people die and stuff, you know. Like my family's not going to go through and print all my fucking emails where I, you know, where I was setting up interviews with Jim Mars and shit.
Fortunately,
yeah.
We can at least see some, like some of the older, kind of before Facebook and all this other stuff, people used to communicate on email messaging lists.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
UFO updates used to be an email messaging list, you know, back in the day. And unfortunately, some of that stuff's been archived. There's even archives of like old FidoNet BBS stuff from like the early 90s of like, you know, messages back and forth between people.
Yeah.
And one of the funny things is when you actually look at this personal communication, people like talk about all the drama on UFO Twitter, all the fighting between researchers and all the crap talking and all the like, and that it's somehow different now. Nah. If you look at the researchers back in the 80s, 90s, even letters from like the 60s and 70s, they were shit talking each other all the time. Like there was so much animosity between various researchers and just like outright name calling and like abuse. Like that's always kind of been part of this topic. That's not a UFO Twitter thing.
Yeah, for sure. At least back then they had to put their name on it. That was at least the now you're talking to, you know, Space Brother 4392 and they're in England and it's like, why? And they're usually like 15 years old. And it's like, why are you calling me an asshole, dude? I don't even know who you are.
Yeah, you look at that stuff back then and people not only had their name, they'd have their phone number and address underneath.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
You know, you could call them up if you wanted to. Like, yeah, these days everybody's anonymous.
Yeah, it's crazy. Now, I'm hesitant really to get into it, but it does bear sort of, we have kind of waxed poetic about the olden days. How do you feel about the change, you know, the post-2017 change? I call it, you know, all us old UFO heads, we're kind of like, we don't like the UAP thing, but I use UAP as sort of as the delineation mark of post-2017. Like, we're in the UAP era. They can have it. I don't want anything to do. I'm bored to tears with all this. But as someone who has a rich appreciation for the history of all this, as do I, you know, who's been in this for a long time and has seen the ebbs and flows and the disclosure claims over the years and the hearsay and the rumors and shit that float up to the surface and get everybody all excited. I guess, what's your take sort of on the last, you know, we're closing in on a decade now of this, which to me is like, these people who are just got on board in 2017, they're starting to jump off the fucking bandwagon because they're like, look, I got into this and now it's not happening. But what's your take in general, just sort of on this sea change that's gone down since 2017? Because it has been, you know, it's been quite the transition from the olden days when I got into all this.
Yeah. So the post 2017 stuff, like I say, for those of us that have kind of been in the topic for a while, the idea of disclosure isn't exactly new, right? So somebody's pretty much been saying the government's going to tell us the truth about UFOs for the last 75 years. It's always just around the corner. It's always just next year. And it just never happens. So if you've been in the topic, like as long as like I have and other people have, you've kind of seen some of this before to an extent already. And so you're kind of cautious about jumping on that bandwagon. And to be honest, I try to kind of, warn people in 2017, to kind of be a little more cautious, like, wait a second, just hold up, just wait a bit before you form any final conclusions on this. Because to be honest, I'm not what I call disclosurist. I don't truly believe the government has anything to disclose as far as alien bodies, like a spaceship. Do I believe the government keeps secrets? Absolutely. Do I believe they probably have some UFO files they haven't released? Sure, absolutely. Do I think there's alien bodies and spaceships in those files? No, probably not. So I've always kind of felt it's kind of a waste of time and a distraction. And like you say, it's happened before. There's kind of like these waves, like where like disclosure kind of kicks up again around. There was in the early 2000s with Greer's kind of like disclosure hearings and stuff. There was another kind of big wave that disclosure is going to happen. And it kind of never does. And when you've seen a lot of people like come and go with these same claims, they just they don't excite you anymore. And so I've always been kind of not all that interested in the post-27 developments. A lot of people argue, but so much progress has been made since 2017. I would kind of argue it hasn't. I'd almost argue we've kind of stepped back than where we were before then. It just really kind of depends on what you mean by progress. Obviously, there's some differences in the past. It's gotten a lot more attention in Congress than it's gotten in the past. We have some of these whistleblowers, so-called whistleblowers, I'll say, like Grush, for example, that have told stories and that have been taken seriously in Congress, I guess. But ultimately, how have we really progressed? Like, what's actually changed? What do we have now that's really changed the story as far as evidence that we didn't have before 2017? And the answer is nothing. So,
it's really interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
I personally believe we actually haven't really made a whole lot of progress post 2017. I actually think we've kind of taken a step back. There may be more people in the topic now. But again, what's that a metric of? Like, that you got more people into sensational news? Like, how does that really push the topic forward at all? Like,
Well, it's really interesting because like you just pointed out, there's like not just a new crowd of players or stars, let's call them.
And the same crowd of players.
And it's similar, yes. Yes, and the people who are just under the surface that seem to be always there kind of pulling the strings on this. But the audience is like new too, which is really interesting. And what I find, and I'm sure I'll ruffle some feathers here, folks, but this is just how I see it. And it starts with an anecdote, right? I got really into not the theory, but the community of flat earthers, right?
Yeah.
And I really wanted to know, okay, who are these people that got into the flat earth? So being a serious student of the strange, I wanted to know, like, what is the history of this flat earth theory, and studied it, followed it all the way back to like the mid 1800s when it first became like what it is today, right? Like an organized idea put forward by like one dude, and then it spread, and it kind of, so
the guy that dug the trenches. Like he
guy who was, he was essentially like a UFO guy. He was like, the Earth is flat. He went around England doing presentations about how the Earth is flat, and it was like there wasn't TV back then, so this was like the hottest. You would go to see this guy who just rumbled into town like a carnival guy to tell you about the flat Earth. He would argue with like scientists and shit and people who knew better, and that was like part of the show, right? And then he'd fucking skip off and go to the next town. And this was like in the 1850s. Then his writings and shit passed down, and other people, blah, 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 right? So I go to the Flat Earth Convention, and to a person, there was one person out of dozens and dozens and dozens of people that I talked to who had any knowledge of the history of Flat Earth up until like it became a thing again, like in the last 15 years, right? They're just like, some of them were like, I don't care about any of that shit, man. I only care about what's going on now with the flat Earth. I don't care about how it started and evolved over the years and shit. And to me, it's like, I see the same thing in the UAP community, where they're like, they don't care about anything pre-2017. They're only interested in the here and now, and they only care about the UAP era, if you will. And it's remarkable, the very, very similar sort of mindset of people, where it's like, you need to have that appreciation of the history of this topic, or else you're not really going to understand what's happening now. but it's a psychological thing where they're like, no, I just got into this after this became popular in 2017. I'm not going to bother to look into Foo Fighters or the airship thing or all these cases that you've dug up over the years.
I've heard that from so many people. Like, I've had people directly tell me, is like, why do I need to look into this old stuff when the government's got spaceships, and bodies, and they're telling us about it in Congress? Like, what does this stuff matter? Like, it's like, but it does matter. And like, you need to like know the history of this topic. The funny thing is though, is like, I'll try and show somebody a case, right? And they'll have no interest in it. But the second one of these UFO celebs decide to dig one of these old cases out of history, all of a sudden everyone's like, oh my goodness, that case is amazing. It's like, wait a second. Like, you guys had no interest in it before, but now that, like, say Corbell posted a case, he recently posted a case about the alleged Christopher Columbus sighting that was almost certainly just like a campfire on the land that they saw. But yeah, so yeah, people they don't have the interest in the history. Like, it's really hard to get people interested in it. I've been doing my posts for like 2.5 years, and every single day. And I still, don't get great view numbers or a whole lot of people that really kind of like check them out, because it's just it's not as fun, I guess, as hoping the government's going to tell you about alien biologics and crash spaceships. But like I said, that's actually why I got into what I was doing. Is like, I got online and just like, there was no UFOs in UAPs anymore. It was all disclosure. Like, nobody was talking about the past. And I felt that, well, I should at least be sharing some history with these folks. Maybe nobody will read it, but I'll put it out there anyways. And maybe eventually they'll decide it's important to learn about history and they can go back and find it because it'll be there for them. But that was my motivation, is to try and throw some history into the conversation when there really wasn't anyone talking about actual UFOs.
I know exactly what you're saying. Yeah, there was I forget who it was, and I wouldn't name and shame them anyway, really, on the show, but there was someone who's like a character in the UAP universe who was like, a few years back was like, holy shit, everybody stop. I just heard about, there were UFOs that were over nuclear bases. And it was like, bro, like, come on, man. That's like fucking old news, dude. That's like 60s, 67 or whatever, like the big Malmstrom was like, there was this thing in the Malmstrom Air Force. You're not going to believe it. And it was like, this is embarrassing. Yeah, it's and one of the cases that like I've done a presentation on was a case, Mike 6 incident that kind of was over a base in North Dakota there in the 60s, like 1965, around the time period of like when the Malmstrom stuff happened. So yeah, that's just really old. But yeah, it is funny because you'll see a lot of these people like just discover something, and it's like, you're just discovering that. Like, and some of these people, they're not really even new per se to the topic. Like, they've been doing the disclosure thing for like 5 years now or 7 years now, but yet they're still they're finally getting around to the basics. And at least that at least makes me a little happy that they're eventually kind of getting around to looking at like some of the history. I think, like you said, now more and more people are starting to kind of drop off this disclosure bandwagon as things like don't come to fruition, like no evidence is actually put forward. And so I think some people are starting to look more at the history more. It's just, unfortunately, a lot of people just also they don't have the research skills to really properly look into a case. So even when they do look into history, they're watching a silly YouTube video or a documentary, or they're reading a book that's got it just completely like backwards and incorrect. Yeah. Well, I suppose, I guess that's where I lucked out, because like when I first kind of got back into this, like you, I was into it as a kid, and I went to college, got out of it, and then got back into it when I got out of college and everything. And back then, that was like 2001, 2000, the early 2000s, 2003, when I really got back into it through Jim Mars. And back then, it was like all you really had were like books and a couple of like shitty websites. So there certainly weren't podcasts or anything like YouTube where you could digest this information for better or for worse, like in 20 minutes or something. Or even a couple hours, like a podcast. It was like, you had to really kind of commit to reading the books. And like, I remember reading like the Jim Marrs book and like going to the index and then going through like, okay, well, where did he get that from? This book, I want to get that, that's how I was like learning about this shit,
That's one of my favorite things to do is I love a book where like a third of the book is just references in the back of it.
Yeah.
Because then I can just dig through and like find all that other stuff and dig it up. I'd actually argue though that people still need to like read books. I actually think it's problematic that people just get their information from podcasts and like TV shows, because to an extent they're entertainment, like not to bust on podcast or anything, but like really you need to actually read a book to like get all the details and to really get it in there. Even just from comprehension kind of point of view, like if you're just listening to it, a lot of people, you just don't record a lot of that information. Like you've actually got to pick up a book and read it. And that's what I always tell people is pick up a damn book, turn off YouTube, grab a book and read something about a case. You'll learn more than you will on that, podcast or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, believe me, no umbrage taken on my part. That was the point I was trying to make, that like, if you got to commit to reading a book. Like you can do podcasts, you can do other shit at the same time. It's like that most people do. So it's like they're driving or whatever. And it's like the information I don't think it really quite, resonates as well as like when you're just, you got a Sunday afternoon, it's cold outside, maybe a snowstorm, you just fucking get under the blanket with a good book and you read it and that's it. That's your only like focus on, and you absorb the information a lot better, I think. But I think it's kind of what you're saying too. So,
and you don't have to, you don't have to go full UFO nerd like me and buy several hundred UFO books and read them. But like, honestly, a lot of these post 2017 people would be better off if they'd like go look at like one of these top 10 like list of UFO books like on QFOS and like read through them to learn some of the history, right? Like if you've been in this topic for years and like you haven't at least read like Hynek's books, like Kehoe's books, like Valet's books, like some of these other books, like what are you even doing like in this topic, like in my opinion?
Yeah.
There's like some base learning you've got to do that just people aren't doing.
These are, well, like to put it in like TV parlance, even though it's probably not, I think they're like, these are like when a show goes off the air and it's like, it'll have like 3 million viewers like every episode. Then the finale will have like 20 million. It's like we got to watch the Friends finale, even though we don't watch it usually, but it's a happening. That's what it is. They think they're jumping in at the end on the season finale of UFO. So they're like, okay, all right. I don't need to find out what happened before. I just want to see how the ending is. They think, but
which is why
I'm skeptical of that myself.
Yeah, which is why the books they're reading probably aren't even the best books. They're reading like the more recent books, right? They're reading like the Lou Elizondo books, like the Ross Coldhart books, the books that really are mostly fluff and don't really have a whole lot of like actual useful content, like on the history of this topic. And so even when they do read books, in my opinion, they're kind of not the right books that they should be reading.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. That's books, man. It's been an interesting conversation, sort of talking about the physical challenges in a way of this whole topic, the paper versus the digital. It's an interesting conundrum. It's a sea change that we've experienced here as a community. Tell me about the Wolski Emilson Polish abduction, because this has a monument to it over in Poland.
Yeah. In fact, the monument is supposedly the first ever monument erected for an abduction. It was erected before the Hill Monument was erected in New Hampshire. So the Wolski case, this case took place back in Emilcin, Poland, back in 1978, on May 10th. And he's an old guy. He's a 71-year-old farmer. Emilcin's kind of like this small kind of village, like in Poland. And there's only something like 70 people or something there. Like, it's so small. There's like 2 television sets. There's like 1 restaurant or something. And there's like no real stores. Real small place. And it's in the early morning. He's kind of driving his horse cart through, along this road. And he's cutting through this field on this property because I guess his horse kind of doesn't have the right shoes for like the hard path of the road. And as he's cutting through this field, and he sees these 2 kind of small, kind of like beings. And this case is a case where we actually have little green men. Little green men's always kind of been a joke in ufology, like they're not actually green. No, these guys were actually little green men. And so he sees these 2 little green men. As he approaches in his kind of horse-drawn carriage, they kind of hop on the back of it there, on the back of the horse carriage. He kind of hears them. They make a sound. He kind of can't understand them. They're kind of making like a tick, ticky, ta, ta, ta kind of like sound, kind of fast, kind of like sound. And he kind of, again, they don't communicate with him. And he continues driving through this field with his horse, and they approach this kind of open clearing area where they see kind of a rectangular, kind of short bus size kind of object that's kind of like floating in the sky there. Like, one of these beings kind of like taps him on the shoulder, kind of indicates to him like, stop the horses and everything, and they get off. And from this kind of like craft, this kind of like platform kind of raises down from it, and it's kind of just hung up on wires kind of on each side of this platform. And he gets onto this platform, and this platform rises up into the ship, and he steps into it with these beings here, these kind of little green guys, and they're kind of wearing like this black kind of like coverall, almost kind of like a diver suit outfit. They've got kind of like this hump kind of like on their back area. And as he gets into this craft, the door kind of it closes up on him. And it closes up kind of an interesting way. It kind of rolls up almost like a piece of carpet, kind of like rolls up. The door rolls up, closes, and there's nothing in this craft. It's pretty much featureless. All that's in this craft is this kind of, again, a bench that, just like the platform, is kind of just hung there by these kind of wires. And they ask the guy, they tell him, basically indicate to him. So again, there's no real communications. It's kind of mostly gestures. Like, they do make sounds, but there's no actual talking to him. But they kind of indicate for him to get naked, to strip off his clothes.
Okay.
So the guy does it, right? Like, he takes off his clothes. They bust out this device, which, again, it looks almost like a saucer. It's like 2 bowls kind of put together. He says it kind of like buzzes and makes a vibrating sound. And he thinks it's probably taking pictures of him somehow, possibly internally. I'm not sure, right?
Jesus.
So despite this, this guy's having a great time. He has nothing but positive things to say about this experience.
Or because of it. Who knows? Who are we to judge, right? He's like, hey, he's doing the poses. He's like, yeah, I'm loving this. These people love. They see they're all about me. All right, yeah. So he's having a good time.
He's having a good time. They've got him naked, took the pictures or whatever they were doing. They offer him this food, right, that looks supposedly like an icicle, and it's like kind of soft, right? But he doesn't want any of it. He's like, no, I don't want it. I'm good, thank you. And one of the weird things inside this craft he notices is, like I said, it's pretty much featureless. There's nothing in there except for this platform. And there's a couple of dead rooks, these birds, right, that are kind of like, well, they're not dead, they're paralyzed. They're laying on the ground by the door, and they're just kind of like just kind of barely moving around, like they're paralyzed, not doing anything.
Jesus.
And the only other thing besides that in this craft is there's kind of like a hole in the wall, like kind of like a key spot. And one of these beings kind of has like a stick kind of like thing that he sticks into like this thing to kind of move it around a bit. Anyway, so that's pretty much most of his encounter. He gets dressed again. He tries to leave. He goes to leave, walk out the craft, kind of like waves goodbye. Thinks it's a positive experience. They lower him back down. He hops back on his horse-drawn cart, rides back home. Now, at that point, supposedly, there's a lot of kind of conflicting details, and this is one of the things you encounter when you investigate these cases, is even when you go look at the primary source kind of material, is that a lot of times they say different things and different details kind of develop. And one of the details here is that some people say he immediately told his son that lives with him, his adult son, about this event. But another document actually says he went home and fell asleep for like 3 or 4 hours and woke up and then told this story to people. So that might play a role into what you think might be the actual cause for the case. Like, if it was really, did he tell them immediately and there's no sleep involved, or is this a story he told after he came home and fell like asleep? So his sons go out there, they investigate, they supposedly find like some footprints, but at this point it's kind of hard to tell because even though it's like a small village, like everybody's kind of got involved and they're going out there to look and check things out. And at one point, pretty quickly, supposedly there's like 14 bus loads of people that come out to check out this sighting. And so it's kind of trampled, the ground's trampled. So there's not a whole lot of kind of like, physical evidence they can get from this. It got some coverage like in the paper. Apparently it worried the school children kind of so much that they were skipping classes. And so their teacher decided to hold a little kind of critical thinking workshop to teach them some critical thinking skills, to educate them kind of about space and life in the universe, with a good, healthy shoveling in of Soviet space propaganda as well, of course. Lots of promoting how amazing the Soviet space program was, apparently. Apparently, this didn't work, though. The kids were still too scared to go to school. So they bring in like this local militia because I guess that's kind of how like the police are organized. This is, Soviet Poland, in the 70s. And they investigate the case, and they find him kind of like a trustworthy kind of guy. Supposedly he doesn't drink. He supposedly, like I say, he's got no TV, allegedly doesn't know anything about UFOs, although this might not actually be true either. And while they think he's a trustworthy, sober guy, like they don't really think there's anything they can do with like the story. Yeah. Eventually, it gets picked up by ufologists, in Poland, and it becomes what is basically Poland's kind of version of Roswell as far as like fame goes. Obviously, it's not like a UFO crash. But it's probably like one of the most famous cases in Poland. And it's like some books have been written about it. But one of the interesting things about this case is about the hypnosis I mentioned earlier with Symington. One of the theories of this case was that there was this other researcher, this Polish guy named Binnall, and he allegedly hypnotized this Jan Wolski guy to tell this story as kind of a retribution against another ufologist that he felt had kind of slighted him in some way.
Oh, wow.
So the story goes is this guy, Varzanik, had a history of kind of like hoaxing UFO photos to try to teach people like a lesson about like, UFOs and whatnot. And he'd had some hoax photos published like in a magazine before. But apparently there's a TV show they were going on and they were showing kind of like how hypnosis works. And on this show, they brought out a hypnotist that hypnotized Varzanik. And they were testing to see if they could plant a UFO story into him and make him tell it after the fact. And Varzanik was like, nah, it won't work. No way you're going to get me to repeat this UFO story. Apparently it did work. And so the theory is that he was so humiliated by this event that what he did is he went and told, supposedly Varzanik actually knew this Wolski guy's son ahead of time. So the idea that Wolski was completely unknowledgeable at UFOs might not actually be true. In a lot of these cases, they really kind of promote the idea of the simpleton rural farmer. He couldn't possibly make up this story. He's just a dumb farmer, like with no knowledge of this stuff. So it must be real. So they kind of play that up in this case as well. Turns out this guy's son actually knew this researcher, and he supposedly hypnotized Wolski to tell this story so he would trick this other guy. This guy's the Zbigniew Bolner, who's kind of a big-time Polish UFO researcher, who picked up this case and publicized this case into thinking it was an amazing UFO case. And then he would come out and say, just kidding, gotcha, it was a hoax, I did this all myself. Now, the only problem with that theory, again, is the TV show that he was supposedly humiliated on never actually aired, so nobody ever saw it. So you got to ask yourself, would you really be pissed off enough to want to go and pull off this hoax?
Yeah.
And then if you did pull it off, why would you never tell anyone you like tell people you really did it? Because he never came out with the gotcha saying I hoaxed it. Like that story didn't come out for another like 20 something years. and when this guy basically bought this guy's files and like went through them like 2 decades later and kind of like figured out this kind of like story.
Interesting.
And so, and again, there's a question of whether Vozanik actually had hypnotism skills to even pull this off. Because if you recall, he didn't believe it could be done in this TV show. He's like, you can't implant memories. So he went from like kind of being naive to hypnotism to supposedly being an expert that could hypnotize a guy and pull off a hoax within months. That seems kind of doubtful to me. But it is interesting that's, again, 2 stories where we have these high strangeness events where somebody later claimed that actually I just hypnotized the guy and it's all a lie and it never actually happened.
So weird. That is just so weird because I've never even heard of that as being put forward as an explanation before. So that's just wild. Yeah. Yeah.
It's
interesting.
It's a strange one, and I guess that guy's not still around anymore. But his son, the Vittel Verzanik's son, said that story is nonsense. He's like, my dad could not hypnotize anyone. He had no skill. In fact, he said that story was so slanderous that they tried to stop the book being published that told the story because they said it was pure nonsense.
Oh, wow.
So. But it was a claim. One of the other claims for this story was that perhaps it was a Soviet propaganda kind of campaign, because at this time, the Polish economy was crashing, like it was in the dumps, and there was a lot of news coverage on it. And so one of the theories is that it was actually just like Soviet soldiers out there, like with a helicopter and like, uniforms and whatnot. And the uniforms, what these creatures supposedly look like, do actually look like people in diving suits, including the kind of like hump on the back, like could be, like the tanks and whatnot. But again, there's no actual evidence of that theory either. And that's how it is with a lot of these. We've got a lot of theories of like what could have been, maybe, but no real evidence to point to what really happened here. In this case, again, was it a waking dream, kind of a lucid dream he had when he got home and woke up and then told it? Or did he really have a strange encounter? It's hard to know, but it's a fun case, and it's a real Little Green Man case. And there's actually a cool comic book that a guy created that kind of told the story as well.
Nice. Yeah, it's interesting. I had Fred Anderson on. We talked to him a couple weeks ago, and
Fred's great. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was saying to him, it's a very xenophobic sort of thing to say, but I'll cop to that. But I was like, I wish there was like a Fred Anderson for like all these different countries, where they undoubtedly have like a rich history of UFOs. Specifically, what I'm thinking about is China. You would think that there must be like fantastic cases from China that someone must have looked into, like in the 60s and 70s and 80s, but because of the language barrier and sort of the closed nature of that country, like we don't know about them. But I bet you there's some really fucking awesome like humanoid type cases that just aren't even out there really.
There are some. I posted some in my post, because there's a guy named Paul Dong who published a book, UFOs Over China, with another controversial UFO figure, Wendell Stevens. But yeah, it's a collection of stories out of China, because apparently China had a pretty good tradition of UFO research. They had like various UFO research organizations that had publications that they did and whatnot. But yeah, that's actually one of the things is that I think is really also lacking in this field, is that the lack of information from other countries. And a lot of that comes down to like the language barrier, right? Like, there's so much good stuff like in Sweden and France, and like I can't actually read the language. Like I translate some of these publications, like, but it's a slow process, right? Like even working on this Polish case, like there's so much stuff I was, Google translating it by hand as I was going through all these documents.
Yeah.
But there's rich history of UFOs everywhere, but unfortunately, a lot of those cases just don't seem to make it, over the pond over here in America. Yeah, and we need more of that. That's why I like researchers like Fred that does a lot of work pointing out great Swedish cases. And Fred's actually been very helpful. He sent me some files on some of the Swedish cases I've made posts about as well. But yeah, we need more foreign cases and more sharing with foreign researchers. Honestly, I think foreign ufologists are way better than American ufologists. They're more helpful. They're more friendly. One of the things I've noticed with the
I assume they're like less territorial too. Like here,
exactly yeah. The researchers here in America kind of look at their cases as like, it's mine. I'm not sharing with you. That's my research. That's my like. That's the wrong approach, in my opinion. I think, particularly if we want to get anyone to this topic, is we need to openly share our research and work together with each other. And it seems researchers in other countries like Europe and elsewhere are just, like you say, less territorial. They're more willing to share their research openly with other researchers. Because I've asked a lot of people here in the States for stuff. They're like, no, I'm not sharing that. That's mine. That's mine. It's like, is it really though? You didn't see it. If anyone's, it's that witness's signing. You just recorded it. Like,
that's just ridiculous. But more foreign UFO stuff. We used to back in the day, and we try to get back into it a little here on the revival. But yeah, that was kind of one of my goals in the early days of Binnall America, to have different UFO researchers on from different countries to try and find out about not only the cases, but the history of the interest in the topic in these other countries. But so there's still some that we never. Again, another country like, and maybe there is someone who wrote a book, but like India. India is like fucking huge, and it's got a rich history. And I'm not just talking about the Vimanas. Everyone thinks about that when you mention UFOs in India, but it's like, there was a 60s, 70s, 80s. There was time when we were having these crazy things happening. Were there things happening over there? I don't know. I don't know if anyone even has looked into it or like Albert Rosales does have the humanoid type cases, and he has a fantastic database himself. But again, it's like, you just don't know. You know what I mean? There's no I don't really know too many iconic like Joe Simonton type case of India or China or something like that. But they're out there. They've got to be out there.
Yeah, India, the more famous India cases is like there was like a sighting over an airport in New Delhi, I think back in the 60s. So I've got, at least a few India cases as well. You'd probably be hard pressed out of the 4,500 things I posted to not find a case in some obscure country. Right. I mean, I've got probably a dozen or more in Uruguay or, there's other like places. So, there are some India cases, but yeah, that's kind of one of the reasons why also when I'm picking cases that I dig in deeper to and I've done lectures on, a lot of them are actually foreign cases, like Valençol was like French, like, ML teams in Poland, is because it also gives me an opportunity to work with other researchers. Like one of the things with the Valençol cases, I ended up actually doing a whole second part after I got in communication with some actual French ufologists who kind of helped me out with some additional details. And I think we need that kind of collaboration with our foreign UFO research friends more often. We need to get that going on because there's lots of good cases over there that just don't get the attention that they should.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of like to the point I was making earlier, it's like also, look, I don't know how it works over in like India or China, but I would assume that like maybe there are or were like local newspapers and shit. And it's like some of that stuff may never... Like, you can get on newspapers.com and search, like, American newspapers or whatever, but I don't know if there's even any sort of type thing like that for India where you can be like, okay, let me see if there's any UFO cases that were reported in this small area of India and local newspapers. Like, I don't even know if there's an ability to search that kind of thing, or if anyone is, but it's like that. I think there would be gems in these places all over the world that we, haven't really... because of the language barrier, haven't really been, and the technology and everything, haven't been able to dig into yet. So, in the future, maybe.
Yeah, that's the thing with like, there may be archives, like, I don't know about India, like, but some countries have various newspaper archives. But if, for example, like you're a foreigner like me that doesn't know the language, like, what do you even search for? Right. In the newspaper archive. Like, there's been times where I've actually known what newspaper something's supposed to be in. And it's taken me forever to find the actual article in there because, like, I don't know the words. I'm like, which one of these articles is the UFO one? Darn it. It's a while to figure it out. So, yeah, newspaper archives are a great resource. In fact, I would encourage anyone interested in this topic to spend a little time, try to find a UFO sighting local to you in your area. maybe it's a sighting. Maybe try and find a sighting from the early days, from 1947, that happened in your area, or maybe try and find a sighting that happened on your birthday. Dig into the historical files. Dig into your newspapers. You may not even have to pay for a newspaper archive. A lot of states have local newspaper archives that archive their local papers in that state. Your local library probably not only has digital access to various newspaper archives that people can check into. There's microfilm. Not everything's online. Sometimes you might actually have to go look at microfilm, but a lot of stuff is online. And I think that's would be a very fun and useful learning tool for people on this topic, is to go, to attach them to some element of the history of this topic, is to go find a historical sighting that's kind of local to you or regional to you. And there's sightings out there for everywhere, right? Somebody's seen a UFO near you at some point in history, guaranteed. So it's actually not that hard to find something. And when I've dug through papers, I've found sightings that were never reported in the literature before. So who knows? You may find a new sighting that we've never heard of before that you dig out of a newspaper.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because someone in your, folks out there in your small town maybe has never looked into it before, and it's like, oh shit, this is a crazy case, and no one. Well, because even though Stan sort of discovered Roswell, in the early '80s or whatever, it was kind of in the newspaper that something happened, right? That something, And the funny part is, it happened in '47. Stan didn't learn about it until the early '80s, and it's because he didn't have a newspapers.com or whatever to look, and so it was out there waiting for him all that time. It was out there waiting for everybody all that time, and it was it never, if he hadn't got that tip at the radio station that day or the TV station, he never would have looked into it, and the rest is history. So it's he may never. I mean, who knows? Maybe he was sort of spurred to go look at it from the powers that be, or who knows? That's a whole other thing. With what the deal with how Roswell became a household term. But still, if that confluence of events hadn't happened, that could still have been sitting for another 10, 20, 30. Could be unknown today. You know what I mean? So it's a crazy story like that.
Yeah, I believe there was. I think there might have been a book or two in the 50s or 60s that may have vaguely referred to a crash.
Yeah, it was mentioned in passing, in a couple
no
places,
actual details. Yeah,
right.
So there's stuff out there to find that it's just been forgotten that you could be the one to find.
There you go. Now, before I let you go, I got one more thing I want to ask you about. I don't think you seem skeptical, and especially with the big cases. So, and I'm not really a huge fan of this case, just because I haven't really dug into it too much. It's kind of it was featured on Unsolved Mysteries, the new reboot, the first season. I'm from Boston. It's Western Mass. It's the Berkshire UFO sighting. I'm laughing because it's to me, I had only heard about it within the last 10 years. Because they had a monument for it, a giant cement cinder block, giant thing, and the town was get rid, they got rid of it. The town seized it. I haven't talked to the main guy who's the main promoter of the case since all this went down. But as far as I know, no one knows what happened to the giant cinder block monument that the town seized. And he was talking about suing the town, but as far as I know, I never heard anything else about it.
Thomas Reed?
Yeah, Thomas Reed. Yeah, he was talking about suing the town because he wanted the cinder block back, but it never, as far as I know, it never resurfaced, which would be I really wonder if they just destroyed it or if it's in a warehouse somewhere. But I was laughing as I was kind of setting this up because the fact that it was featured on the Unsolved Mysteries, to me, it's a second tier UFO case. It's you got the big UFO cases. Then this one kind of came along. It's the Ant-Man of UFO cases. It's these new Marvel movies where you're who is Chucklefuck and how is he? And it's no, he's part of the Marvel universe. He's just 3 tiers down from the X-Men. And it's oh, okay. That's kind of how I view the Berkshire UFO case. But it is an interesting case, and it's pretty vivid, and it's got a lot of moving parts to it. So, I mean, I guess it is a pretty good case. But, I mean, what's your take? I'm sure you've looked into it deeper than I have.
Well, like you said, it's one of these cases that Well, it's an old case. It didn't really pop into the UFO zeitgeist until maybe a decade ago, I think is maybe when he first kind of came out with like the story. And I never really liked personally how promotional the guy is, but the guy's career is like as a model agent, I think. Like he owned a some sort of model agency or something. And so he started doing all these like UFO conferences, like UFO X or something like that, like promoting it. But again, I'm not sure how much actual contemporary to the time period documentation there is, because I think this happened in the 60s, if I remember correctly. And I think there may be like a newspaper or something or so at the time that talks about a UFO sighting. But this is one of the cases where the vast majority of the story didn't seem to develop till decades kind of after the fact. Yeah. And all we kind of really have is his word to take that this was an issue with them throughout their life. Like one of the parts of the story is that it's like not just him, if I remember correctly. Like his whole family's kind of been involved with it. Abductions, like generational abductions. Like people talk about like my grandparent, my mom was abducted. They abduct us generationally. I believe that's an element of the Reed story. But yeah, it's because there's nothing really with that case like that. There's really nothing to per se investigate besides the claims that they're making. Like there's nothing really I can go look into from the time period to really substantiate like what they say happened. Yeah. So it's an interesting story, and it got pretty good coverage in the recent Unsolved Mystery and whatnot, and it's been covered before. And like I say, Tom Mystery's gone to UFO conferences. They even in the Roswell Museum has a great gift shop that. Again, I've probably bought everything in there several times. And they would sell his, he has some artwork he kind of sells of the incident as well that I have somewhere around here that kind of like little print, like 8x10 prints, like of some kind of new recreation that like he signs. But again, it's just one of those stories that all we have is like their word. And I'm skeptical because it's so much of it didn't develop until recent years. I'm skeptical of a case where somebody claims something happened decades ago, but they didn't tell the story decades ago, because there's not really a whole lot you can do with it.
Yeah, it certainly seems like the kind of story that's really reliant on a whole bunch of, because if I remember the Unsolved Mystery special episode, there was like three or four. Yeah. There's like three or four or five talking heads, like different people who experienced something that night or whatever. But it's like all dependent upon that.
And a lot of those talking heads, again, they didn't even come out with their original story, like Thomas Reed's story. Like it's kind of after the fact, like, oh yeah, I saw something that night, like 40 years ago or 50, 60 years ago. Right. So. Yeah, there's more than just him, There's got the family members. There was a lady that talked about seeing something. So there's a few people that claim they kind of saw something that night, and there may actually be records in the paper from some sightings, but like his actual encounter was not in the paper, I think, at the time. Like none of that was in the newspapers. But I guess the local historical society, what is it, the Great Barrier Historical Society or whatever it's called, declared it a real event, whatever that's supposed to mean, historically. So
yes, yeah. There was a plaque on the cinder block, I think. Yeah, there was a plaque on the cinder block. Since they took the cinder block away, now there's a new thing. I'm gonna try and get out there this summer to check it out. But it's like a UFO park with like a monument and a thing. So they're still, they're still trying to make it a thing, but. I don't know,
Nothing wrong with a good UFO monument. I mean, even Valenthal case now has a monument out there. Like I said, the Emerson case has a monument. Hey, if it can bring in tourism, I mean, hey, go for it, I guess.
Well, I wrote a story recently about they put a monument up somewhere in Russia for like a UFO event. And the priest was like, tear that thing down. And it's like this really horrifying looking alien, like a cartoonish alien and shit. I'll send it to you. I'll have to dig that up and send it to you if you didn't see that. But yeah, he was like, this is demonic. You have to tear down this demonic alien thing. But it was like, it was a monument in recognition of this UFO event that happened. So it's,
I mean, if it's not government money, let somebody put up a monument if they want. Like the ML Chin one was funded by the kind of this local UFO organization called like Foundation, Nautilus Foundation is what it was called, which is a UFO research organization in Warsaw. But yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with people putting up monuments to UFO sightings. Down at the Roswell crash site, the Sci-Fi Channel or was this? Yeah, I think Sci-Fi Channel put a little monument and a plaque like out there.
Yeah.
It's like on this site in 1947, an alleged spaceship crashed. Yeah. So.
Well, there's a few. Yeah, there's the one along the side of the highway for Betty and Barney Hill. That's like through the state of New Hampshire, and I think this. I want to say either the town or the state did one for Pascagoula too. So there's a couple of cool monuments out there. Before I let you go, as someone who's also been in this for a long time, I guess what's your take on sort of just how, like I said, I really got into it like at the turn of the century. Sounds old, but yeah, at the turn of the century. And it was like it was still like UFOs and all the paranormal was still treated pretty shabbily as sort of like not even. Like I always liken it to like pro wrestling. It wasn't like or comic books. It was like shit for dimwits. Let's be honest. It was treated. My poor father. He must have looked at me, a wrestling fan and a UFO guy. He must have been like, "Where did I go wrong?" But it was just treated as like the subject matter, the thing for like dimwits. And now it's like, this is cool. This is like people, it's kind of like, I liken it to geek culture. It's like all of a sudden this stuff is now like the niche stuff. It's cool if you're into the niche stuff. You're not like lame or moron or a simpleton or whatever. You're, or an eccentric weirdo or whatever, you're just someone who has a cool interest in something that's cool. Like UFOs are cool. Like Bigfoot is cool. Like this stuff is cool when it really wasn't treated that way for so very long, especially as I was coming along in this.
I just saw a clip on social media, and it was from some dating show. And it was like a guy that was like, I don't know, it's probably 20, 21, and a girl probably about the same age. And like out of nowhere, the guy starts asking her about Bob Lazar and like UFOs and stuff. And she's like, yeah, I know all about. Yeah. And she's like, I know all about that. Yeah, that's cool. I was like, yeah. So in a way it's got kind of, yeah, like it's the cool hit thing. A lot of kids are like into it. And it wasn't always like that.
No, it wasn't.
Yeah. I mean, there's still a little like, I still get a little when I tell people like what I do, like, I do UFOs. Yeah, I do them full time. Like, I still sometimes get looks like, what are you, like a crazy weirdo? You think we're being visited by aliens? And like, I kind of have to explain like no, I'm like, I take a more agnostic, like historical, like kind of like approach to like the topic. But there's still kind of that association, but it's kind of, it's going away. And it's getting picked up by, like you say, it's cool. It's the trendy thing. You've got like Kardashians doing episodes on going to Area 51, right? And looking for UFOs, and Robbie Williams, talking about UFO hunting and going out to Skinwalker Ranch. And so it's kind of been, it's at least popular culturally now, perhaps more so than it's been. But at the same time, we also don't have a lot of the stuff we used to have. Even 10 years ago, we had UFO TV shows on all the time. Like there's magazines still on the newsstand. Like there's just really none of that like anymore. Like we occasionally get a UFO TV show for a few episodes and then like that's it. But like, I don't know if you recall, like 10 years ago, there was like shows on Discovery, on History. Like, everyone had UFO shows on, and that's just, there's still not that level of kind of like media attention now that I feel there was 10 years ago.
Yes and no. I'll go to slightly disagree with you here because only because like I think the media was so much, even back just 10 years ago, was so much more concentrated. Like I want to say I bet you can go on I bet you almost every streaming service has put out some UFO related series, at least one, if not two or three. That are just like, they're all kind of so canned in this UAP era that I never even watched them. But it's like, I hear about them all the time, that there are this new UFO series. and they're up and they're like 6 episodes and they're kind of like a flash and they're gone. You know what I mean? Because there's just so many of them. But I think, I see a lot of that. But I may, and I think back in the day when it was like, if there was people used to say, oh, there's like 500. There really weren't 500 cable channels, folks. There was like 30. There was like 30 good ones, and then there was the bass fishing channel and shit no one actually fucking watched. But there was like 30, there was like 3 dozen actual channels, like History, Discovery, that kind of thing, the core channels, and then there was all the shit. So if you were in one of those core channels, you were in good shape. And and then occasionally they would have, like Taken, like that was that's kind of what got me back into all this, Taken. The Steven Spielberg miniseries, because that's how I found out about Art Bell and how I ended up at Coast to Coast and everything. So, that had Eric Close in it, who was also in Bryce Zabel's Dark Skies series earlier in like 1997, I believe, which was based on the whole MG12 lore and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, you're right. But as you also point out, I don't watch. I mean, actually, I do end up watching all these silly new UFO documentaries just because I'll watch anything. But they're basically just, there's no substance in them. It's a rehash. It's showing the same gimbal footage and tic-tac video and the same, like 6 people saying the same things they've said in every documentary for the last 7 years. Right. Like, there's just not a whole lot of new relevant content in any of them. Yeah. It's frustrating. Yeah. I do it all day. So when someone's like, did you see the new UFO show? I'm like, no, dude, this is my deal. I can't fucking do that at night.
I'm watching a new fiction show right now that's kind of about UFOs. It's a new British show called Small Town Big History. And it's created by the comedian Chris Dowd, the Irish comedian guy.
Okay.
And basically, supposedly the people in it were kind of abducted on the eve of the millennium. And now it's like 25 years later and they're having to deal with like the aftermath of what happened. And there's like dead birds that fall out of the sky or something. I don't know. Weird. I've only watched 1 episode, but I've just started it and it just came out this week. So we get fiction shows now too about UFOs coming out.
Yeah. There was one on TBS about about abductions. I forget what it was called, but it was like, that was probably one of the best UFO themed shows, fictional shows I've ever seen. It was a comedy. But it was like really on, like, I think even they had like a experiencer like support group and shit. And the guy like came and he's like, I think I was abducted by aliens. They're like, no, we're experiencers. It was like really well written where it's like, okay, they get the scene really well. I forget the name of it.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about, but I can't remember the name of it either. Yeah. There's some good ones out there. Like The Intruders.
People of Earth. Yeah. That was a great show.
That's it. Yeah. I'll have to go binge that again.
I know. I want to go back and watch it now because I think I kind of dropped out on the 2nd season and I want to see how it all unfolded. But yeah, it was really true to like the real kind of what it's like and how the people are. Some are eccentric and some are like normal and pissed off that this is happening to them and everything else. It was really interesting show.
Sounds cool. Yeah, I like to watch a lot of stuff while I work just because like I'm kind of have like sleeping disorders, like where it's like I basically constantly feel like I've never slept, like so I don't get any really restful sleep at night, so I feel like I've just never really slept. And so in order to stay awake, I've got to have like a lot of constant stimulation going on. And so while I'm working on UFOs all day long, I'm either binging UFO documentaries, I'm watching TV shows or stuff on the screen. And so like I'll put those things up there, and so I'll add People of Earth to my queue of it's really easy to get me to watch something. All you have to do is tell me about something and it's almost guaranteed I'll end up watching it. I'm that easy. I'll watch anything.
There you go. Now we always sort of, I wanted to ask you what happened with the grocery store. So you're trying to check out, you mentioned this. What I was joking with Rachel Nelson because I love your social media because it's like UFO shit, UFO stuff, it's not shit, UFO case. Then all of a sudden some random fucking thing where it's like, my water heater burst and my fucking office is flooded. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. There's a human behind this thing. There's an actual dude who's doing this and putting this stuff out. And like that happened, I think it was today or yesterday, where I'm like looking at your feed and it's like UFO case. And it's like these fucking assholes at the grocery store. And I'm like, oh shit. Jeff's having a problem again. So what happened at the grocery store?
Oh, it's just like I don't have a car at the moment, so like once a week, my friend comes and takes me to the grocery store, and he was kind of just waiting in line in the express line because the kid grabbed a couple of things, and apparently they just recently changed. It was 15 items or less. Apparently they just changed it to 10.
That's so
and
weird.
I didn't have more than 10 different items. I had bought some cans of tuna for, the stray cat that lives around my neighborhood. And that put me over the limit. And and even though I was like already at the checkout lane and like was basically done, she tried to ask me to leave and like go wait in another line that was like 20 minutes long. Like, I'm already done. Like, and they made a whole big deal about it. Like she tried to not authorize my grocery bags, like for the weight scale. So I couldn't use it. It was like, what the heck, lady? I'm leaving, for goodness sakes. Like, it was ridiculous. Like, in my opinion, the proper response would have just been politely to say, next time, can you use a different lane? Like we just changed the rules and they're different now. And next time, get a different lane, because the stuff they did just ended up wasting so much time. It's I would have been done by now. Like, it didn't take me that long to scan a couple extra tuna cans, like, to be honest. Like, my friend only had 4 items. I scanned it quicker than he did. I was done before he was. So, I occasionally post weird things from my life.
I like them. Yeah, the slice of life stuff you post is great. Yeah. And I was kind of like, you had me in an interesting sort of conundrum where I read the thing and I'm like, that's an interesting point. Does the unique, how far can you take the unique items? Is it 10 unique items or less? Or is it just 10 items total? What if you have 9 items plus 3 cans of tuna? That's really technically 12, but it is 10 also because it's 10 unique items. It's like, that's a very Curb Your Enthusiasm kind of argument that you can get into with someone with the grocery clerk. And for sure, it's like, ladies, the express line, just get it through. No one wants to, you're wasting more time arguing about this than, That
was mostly my thing. It's like, you could have handled it differently. There was no reason to try and make like a scene out of it. But
well, people, they gotta find entertainment where they can, I guess, at their jobs, I suppose, right? Plus, give them a little power, right? I'm running the express lane. I take this shit seriously. So I always wrap up the show. What's next for you? I know, obviously this stuff, you're going to keep posting every day, but do you have any sort of like big project that you're working on? I mean, you've been in this a long time. I've been in this a long time. You've probably gotten this plenty too. You're going to write a book. When are you going to write a book? You got to write a book. It's like, I'll write a book when I fucking want to write a book, but that's I'm sure you get it too. So, do you have anything on the horizon, any sort of big thing you want to mention or that you're thinking about working on or are currently working on?
I mean, like I said, I do get the question about like a book a lot. And I'd kind of always put off writing one because the thing is, like, everybody puts out a UFO book and like documentaries, most of them are just garbage and have nothing of like consequence in them. And I've never wanted to be just another dude putting out a book for the sake of putting out a book. Like, if I put out a book, I want it to have some unique like function, and purpose like out there. But I am thinking about putting out a book, thinking maybe first one might just kind of be a day in history thing that's almost like a calendar. Every page is a day, a case of a day for the week. And that way, people have a book that they can, today's date. Okay, let's see, here's a case.
Yeah, like look up your birth. Like when I was digging into to have you on the show, I went and looked for my birthday because it was January 26th. So it was recently on the and like it was all shit. No, that's not your fault. It was just like there's not even these aren't even that
cases, man.
What's that?
Just not any good cases on that day, huh?
Yeah, really, for real. It was like one half-assed like light. It was like, oh come on, man.
Yeah, and I also I've been thinking about, there's a guy like in the UK named John Hanson that's put out these collections of books called Haunted Skies. And I've been thinking about doing a similar kind of thing to that, because he basically, they break them up by year.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And in them, they kind of go by month and date and have different cases. And he even includes screenshot, like pictures of images from old UFO newsletters that have the stories, kind of like I do, like in my post. I've been thinking about doing something like that, because people have asked me, like, do you plan on putting out an encyclopedia? Because I've published over 50,000 pages of images and probably 2,000 pages of raw narrative text in the last 2.5 years. And so I could quite literally build a volume of encyclopedias just based on my post. I may do that eventually, but right now, the most immediate thing I've got going on is we'll be bringing back the show UFO Sunset in the next month. And so I'm working on my next presentation, which is actually going to be on those kind of dumbbell cases where people think the object kind of looks like a dumbbell or like a barbell, like in the sky. And so I've got a couple of those cases I've been working on to bring that back. And eventually, I do want to this year, hopefully, get all my cases put into some sort of online kind of database or system. People will be able to access it easier instead of just using social media, because while you can search Twitter, it's not the best search feature. Sometimes it can be hard to even find my own posts. Sometimes I'll be looking for something I know I posted and I just can't find it in there. I'm like, darn it, Twitter, where's that? So that's what I'm working on, trying to get what I've been doing out, to more people online on the website, and our new show is going to be coming back. So
awesome. And folks can find you, just punch in Jeff Knox, Knox, like Knoxville. Jeff Knox, he's on Twitter, Blue Sky, Facebook, and every day he's got this day in UFO history, multiple posts about things that have happened, at different times over the course of UFO history. I think you're doing amazing work, Jeff. I really do. I love what you're doing. It's so much fun to see. Whenever you post it, like all of a sudden my feed will just have a whole bunch of cool UFO shit on there, and I'll be like, "Oh damn, just what's Jeff got for today?" It's really cool, and it's a lot of fun, and it's a tremendous service to everybody, who hasn't looked at the history of this stuff, or like me, who has but just doesn't have the time to really get those refreshers every day. It's like a cool look back at stuff, and things will remind me. I think you posted, you mentioned earlier, like the Betty Barney Hill, like when they came out and spoke to their church group or whatever, and it was like, oh, I remember that part of their story and everything, and it was like, that's thanks to you, Jeff. So I can't thank you enough, and hats off to you on all the work you're doing, and I really enjoyed the conversation, man. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, you can just follow my feed and you'll get a master's course in UFO history. Like, if you just read my stuff on a daily basis, and a year from now, you'd have so much knowledge about this topic. I will point out, you said January 26th. That was your birthday?
Yes. Yeah.
There's some pretty significant stuff that happened that day. Project Sign officially started that day. That kicked off the government's UFO investigations. Okay, the Fortean Society was founded on January 26th.
Interesting. All right.
Yeah. A famous airship sighting where they said it looked like a railway in the sky. A couple close encounter sightings, some airplane sightings. So there's stuff there every day for everyone, no matter what you're interested in. So
see that, folks? So Project Sign, Fortean Society, and then Binnall of America. It's like it all kind of on the same day. It's like a cyclical thing. Different things come up out of it. So there you go. Well, that's interesting.
Equally important, the starting of government UFO investigations, the starting of the Fortean Society, and the birth of Tim Binnall.
You'll have no disagreement there, man. Thank you so much. I've had a blast, brother.
Yep. Thank you.